Bertramkändelare into an alternative universe. Chapter 1. A piercingly cold wind blew across the port forlorn landing pad, raising clouds of dust and dirty snow. From his office on the top floor of the port administration building, Commander Grims gazed thoughtfully at what he had for many years considered his small kingdom. The Old Seeker, a patrol ship of the government of the Confederation of Border Planets, stood on the launch pad, and the activity around it brought a change of pace to the dreary spaceport. The port was quiet, and the Seeker was the only ship in this vast, empty space. However, everything would soon return to normal. One after another, the ships of the border fleet would land, arriving from planets near and far, from all corners of the vast galaxy, from anti-worlds, and life at the Cosmodrome would once again be filled with familiar concerns. Grims approached the large binoculars on a rotating stand and turned them toward the Seeker. After focusing, he noted with satisfaction that the inclement weather hadn't significantly delayed repairs. Flashes of arc welding around the ship's bow indicated that a new mass proximity indicator was being installed. The previous device had been given to Captain Calver for installation on his Outsider. The Outsider, with its newly installed Man-Shen navigation system, was currently hurtling into the unknown light years of the universe. And I, Grims thought gloomily, stay here. How many years have passed since I flew on the Old Seeker to the then uninhabited planets of the Eastern Rim and the anti-worlds of the Western Galaxy? They tell me I'm too valuable in administrative work, and they won't let me go, while young people like Calver and Listwell fly, while I sit here and do nothing. Commander Grims! Grims winced as a high-pitched female voice broke into his thoughts. It was his secretary. Yes, Miss Willoughby, what happened? Calling the control tower. They've just given the Star Wanderer landing clearance. Star Wanderer? Oh, right. Patrol Service. Interstellar Federal Patrol Service, she corrected. He smiled involuntarily, revealing white, even teeth, and the hardness disappeared from his wrinkled face. Okay, I better go wash my neck and put on clean overalls. But everything is always clean with you. Clean overalls, the girl said. Don't pay attention, that's just what they say, he said, and thought that she shouldn't take everything so literally. Landing in 15 minutes, she continued. Oh, those patrol service, he said. They land at the same speed they take off, and when braking, they only use 1.5 seconds of fuel. Why worry if it's the taxpayers who pay for the fuel? However, you yourself served in the patrol service, didn't you? A very, very long time ago. But I consider myself a citizen of the Confederacy, even though I wasn't born here. He smiled again and added, After all, your home is where your heart is. He asked himself, Where is your heart? The Star Wanderer descended with the usual roar of patrol ships. A blindingly brilliant star appeared in the grey sky long before the roar of the engines shook the glass of the buildings and the tall metal trusses. A long tongue of hot gases touched the frozen puddles and scattered snowdrifts, instantly transforming them into a thick cloud of steam that obscured the ship's hull. The wind carried the mist and coated the wide windows of Grims's office. Beetle-like maintenance machines were already rushing toward the bright, shiny cone. I wish they'd show the same attention to their own ships, Grims thought sourly. He sighed, remembering his time in the patrol service. He watched the traffic around the Star Wanderer through the clearing fog. The service vehicles were pulling away, and the red light on the ship's smooth, pointed prow gleamed brightly in the gloom. He's about to take off again, said Miss Willoughby. Yes, I see, Grims muttered, and added loudly, He must have arrived on some important business. I should come aboard. As soon as he takes off, tell the harbour master on duty that I'd like to see him. As soon as possible. A blue flame burst from under the Wanderer, and a moment later the ship began to rise upward, as if fired from an invisible cannon. Through the deafening roar and din, Grims heard the intercom, but couldn't make out a word. His secretary came to the rescue. Commander Verrill to see you, sir, she shouted. I should have washed my neck, thought Grims, but it's too late now. Chapter 2. She hasn't changed much, though, Grims thought as she entered his office. She was wearing civilian clothes, a dark blue high-collared cloak and a white sweater so shiny it seemed to glow. A blouse like that, made of Altair crystal silk, would put a dent in the budget. The patrol service takes good care of its employees, the commander said to himself. She was very beautiful, and even in an old canvas sack, she would have looked no worse than she did now in her luxurious attire. Melted snowflakes glittered in her fair hair like diamonds. "Welcome aboard, Commander," Grimes said. "I'm glad to see you, Commander," she answered quietly. She allowed Grimes to help her remove her cloak and sat gracefully on the offered chair, watching as the commander carefully hung her clothes in the closet. "Coffee, Commander Verrill, or something stronger?" "Something stronger," a smile played on her full lips. "You can afford it, as long as it's not a health issue." "That's right. Scotch from New Caledonia? Wonderful. But what a terrible climate you have here, Commander." "It is what it is. Is it enough?" "Can I have a little longer? I need to warm up." She really needs this, Grimes thought, studying her face closely. It's unlikely, however, that our bad weather is solely to blame for this. "To your health," she said. "Your health," he replied. "One more time?" "Yes, thank you." While fiddling with the glass and ice, he asked her, "You must be here on some important business, Commander. A courier ship has been sent especially for you." "Very important," she replied, glancing at Miss Willoughby, who was busily shuffling papers at her desk. Uh-huh. "Yes, Miss Willoughby. Please take the Falcon manifest to the warehouse manager." "But I'm working on the Kestrel repair list." "This is a more urgent matter, Miss Willoughby." "Okay, sir." The girl carefully folded the papers and slowly, with dignity, left. Sonya Verrill giggled. "And you tolerate such people in your service, Commander?" "This can't be tolerated in civilian life." When I first encountered it, I immediately recalled that when I was in the Space Fleet, any small gift to Lieutenant Mason, she was old General Hall's secretary, would immediately spark rumors about promotions, transfers, and so on. A lot has changed now, and for the worse. But you can speak freely now. My office is regularly sterilized. Sterilized? Yes, every now and then one of the ministry bigwigs decides they don't know enough about our affairs. Then people show up, from your department by the way, and plant listening devices. Let's not talk about it, John. Do you want to pretend to be an innocent lamb? She chuckled. It's part of my job, and perhaps the most important part. What are you doing now? There's no work because our ambassador hasn't reached an agreement with your president about assistance. I think that should happen soon. After all, we've had friendly relations since your independence was recognized. If we're talking about ships, Grimm said, at current rates, it's more profitable for us to fly them ourselves. But we naturally have a few extra ships. For example, you can already consider those belonging to the Commission your own. We have enough ships, she countered, and we have enough employees. But we need to know how to handle this. You've turned this sector of space into your backyard and hung a big sign, keep out. But we still hear rumors. Just remember the time your aerial flew through a dozen alternate timelines. And that wet paint incident a few years ago on the planet Kinsolving. And since that was before your independence, we had to help. What about the ship from the outsider? No, that's a different matter. He was brought there by accident, or he was placed there by aliens from another galaxy. But in any case, we've already arrived. She held out her glass. Of course, Sonya, but... Don't be afraid, John. Olga Popovsky, the beautiful spy, is me. He poured her more whiskey. Thank you. Now, as I said, our superiors are interested in various strange things that seem to be happening in this part of the galaxy. We had a special meeting about it. It was decided that there is only one intelligence officer with sufficiently close ties to the Confederacy. No need to say who it is. It was also decided that it would be best if we asked your government for assistance. Our service will cover all expenses, of course. Frankly, when I was offered the job, I turned it down. I know the border planets, but my memories of them aren't exactly happy. She leaned forward and placed her hand on Grimm's knee. But what, Sonya? But all this business with the border ghosts, the theories about alternating universes don't interest me much. You know something about me, John. You know, there have only been two real men in my life. Bill Moseley, who discovered the quarantine station on The Outsider and who paid with his life for his discovery. And Derek Galver, who, alas, preferred Jane. Damn it, John, I'm tired. Tired of playing the role of a lone hunter, or hunted, as you like. I want a man, a real one. I want a family. The service will thank me with a sizable sum when I retire, and in our galaxy there is a small transport company, with one ship, that will provide a comfortable existence for its pilots and owners. But this is terribly vulgar. I want to go to the alternate universe, where I can find Derek. And if you find both at once? Asked Grimms. Then both will be mine at once, she chuckled. Then she became serious again and added, John, this adventure has the potential to significantly expand the boundaries of human consciousness. And it is capable of delivering you to the quiet harbor you so desire, he raised his glass. For this reason, Sonya, I will do everything in my power to help you. After Sonya left, he began wandering absent-mindedly around the office, doing things his secretary could have done faster and better. However, when she returned from the warehouse and tried to take the work from him, he sent her home for the rest of the day. Finally convinced that he hadn't accomplished anything worthwhile, he stuffed the papers into his desk, poured himself coffee from the vending machine, and lit his battered pipe. He sympathized with Sonya Verrill. He knew more about her past than she had revealed. He pitied her, but also envied her. She was full of hope and striving for her goal. Even if she didn't succeed this time, it wouldn't be so scary. She'd find another goal, then another and another. As an intelligence officer for the patrol service, she'd had the kind of travel opportunities that any professional pilot would envy. Grimm smiled at the thought and muttered, "Someday her prince will come." Yes, he envied her. Even bound by the rigid confines of her office, she enjoyed far greater freedom of movement than he did. He strongly suspected she could have funded this project herself. And I'll sit here for the rest of my life, at the edge of the world. Stop it, Grimms, he said to himself. Stop it, Space Service Reserve Commander Grimms. There's no point in feeling so sorry for yourself. You've already reached the pinnacle of your own life. Nevertheless, after the first cup of coffee, he poured another. I should have proposed to her while she was on Lorna. At the time, he was glad he hadn't. She was accustomed to luxury, and his lack of security would have surely put her off. His children were grown, had their own families, and, being incorrigible homebodies, they would have wanted nothing to do with a professional adventurer. But I'll also be taking part in the expedition, helping Sonya. I'll do everything I can for her, and upon my return, I'll get a first-hand account of what happened. She said she needed a ship. Great, she'll get the Seeker. That old man's long overdue for a workout. She also needs a crew. I'll find volunteers before the expedition is approved, quietly, so as not to irritate the politicians. Volunteers from among those born and raised here. I know why. Locals have a better chance of discovering their doppelgangers in an alternate world than people like me, blown here by the winds of fortune. Assembling a crew of officers won't be difficult, but finding a ship's commander is more difficult. Almost all our captains serve in large land-based companies or in the patrol service. He walked over to the wide window. Night had already fallen. The sky had cleared, the work had ceased, and the lights of the cosmodrome did not obscure the stars' shine. One of them, the brightest, stood out sharply against the distant, dim nebulae. It was the sun of Faraway, a neighboring large planet. Grimes stared into the black, empty space into which Kelvar had fallen in his outsider, perhaps forever. Soon, Sonya Verrill will be going there too, into the mysterious and fantastical abysses of time and space. Could she do it? Grimes shuddered. He felt old and lonely, though he didn't like feeling sorry for himself. He left the office, went down to the garage, pulled out his monocar and headed home. His home was a large villa on the outskirts of Port Forlorn. It was meticulously maintained by a staff of servants, but it lacked the personality and imagination that a woman's presence imparts to any home. The commander locked the car and walked straight from the garage into the house, without pausing, as he usually did, in the greenhouse where he kept hundreds of exotic plants from various worlds. Instead, he went straight to the hall, poured himself a whiskey from the bar, and sat down in front of the telephone terminal. With his free hand, he dialed the library's number. The screen lit up, revealing the face of a girl who, according to her creators, should be attractive in addition to being functional. This old-fashioned desire to create a humanoid robot that would look exactly like a living person always made Grimes smile. A melodic voice asked, "How can I be of service, sir?" "I need any information you have on the border ghosts." "Text or audio information?" "Read it out loud, please." Even this unnatural blonde with a fake voice is still better than no woman at all in the whole house. "A long or a short summary, sir?" "Condensed. If necessary, I'll ask you for details." "Okay, sir. The border ghost phenomenon, as the name suggests, has been discovered only near border planets. The visions aren't confined to individuals and can't be considered subjective in nature. Certain patterns emerge in the visions. A member of a group of people may see themselves, and their comrades will see them, sometimes with different details. There have been cases of entire crews discovering duplicates of themselves. For a long time, it was believed that these phenomena were prophetic and predicted the future. However, as data accumulates, it becomes clear that only 30% of the total number of phenomena relate to the future. Another 30% depict events in the past, 20% depict events at the moment of observation, and the remaining 20% depict situations that are completely impossible in our society. In the year 313 of the New Era, Dr. Fulchamp proposed the theory of alternating universes. Naturally, this was merely an attempt to synthesize centuries-old ideas concerning the infinite series of alternating worlds. According to Dr. Fulchamp, on Earth and other worlds settled over many generations, the boundaries between neighboring worlds. The robot paused. "Please continue. This is a summary and there's no need to worry about using highly technical terms." "Thank you, sir. Well, the boundaries, to put it simply, are so strong that passing through them is utterly impossible. However, on the outskirts of the expanding galaxy, they become so thin that sometimes neighboring worlds directly touch. For example, in the case of Captain Derek Calver, when he served as senior officer on the freighter Lone Lady, he visually penetrated a neighboring world through a hole in the barrier. While the ship was on a routine voyage, another vessel was suddenly spotted flying alongside, and in its wheelhouse, Calver saw himself, but in the captain's uniform. Many of those who had been with Calver were also visible on the neighboring ship. You could even make out the ship's name, Outsider. Several months later, having received a substantial reward, Calver and his comrades bought a used ship and founded a small shipping company. They named their ship Outsider. This case is considered prophetic and can be explained by the fact that, apparently, in a parallel world, the movement of time is slightly shifted in relation to the existing world. Captain Ralph Listowel, in his experimental ship, the Ariel, accidentally entered the resulting hole into the neighboring universe. In an attempt to break the light barrier, Listowel and his crew, while the ship was traveling at just under the speed of light, fired a missile to outpace the photon stream. Naturally, they failed, but the entire Ariel crew was transformed into ghosts. Before they accidentally escaped the alternate universe, they were able to observe extremely strange things. As a result of this foolish experiment, they discovered a method for reversing the charge of an atom, making communication between our world and the antimatter world possible. Without a doubt, the ghost phenomenon deserves the most thorough study, but since the separation of the border planets from the Federation, it has become impossible to expand contacts with the Patrol Service and research centers, which are the only ones capable of conducting a comprehensive study. "Your information is outdated," Grims chuckled. "I beg your pardon, sir?" "Your information is outdated, but don't let that worry you. It's our fault. We, poor, forgetful humans, didn't update your database." "May I ask, sir, where did you find the new data?" "Take a look around. Sunday, hopefully soon, I'll be able to share with you the latest research results." If only Sonya would come back and tell me, he thought, and his good mood evaporated. Chapter 4. A busy week passed. The Mammoth, formerly the Beta Gemini, landed and once again confirmed its reputation as the Frontier Fleet's most troubled ship. En route from Melissa to Lorne, the entire cargo of raw fish spoiled. The chief engineer of the reactor room was beaten during a drunken altercation with the purser. The second, third, and fourth officers, in the presence of the superintendent, caused a scene, refusing to fly even a centimeter above the planet's surface under the command of the Mammoth's captain and first officer. "We'd rather," they said, "go digging up dirt at the sewage treatment plant than go on board." However, Grims still found time to begin selecting candidates. He asked his secretary to compile a questionnaire in which respondents would report all encounters with ghosts. He believed that Sonya Verrill needed people accustomed to such phenomena. Then, reluctantly concluding that a faster-than-light ship would be most suitable for this expedition, he began studying their schedules, trying to find a vessel that could be withdrawn from the recently established trade with the anti-worlds with the least difficulty. Miss Willoughby was forced to distribute questionnaires to the crew of the Mammoth, the only ship to arrive in port. Grimes had long since blacklisted all the ship's officers, and he was planning to distribute the crew among the least responsible routes. However, he studied the returned questionnaires with interest. What he found in them didn't surprise him much. The captain and the senior officer, both of whom had arrived in the Confederation from a ship belonging to the Interplanetary Transport Commission, had absolutely nothing to say. Captain Jenkins' questionnaire was crossed by the bold inscription, "Superstitious Nonsense." But the second, third, and fourth officers, as well as the Psi Communications officer, were third-generation residents of the border planets, and each of them had witnessed the mysterious phenomenon on more than one occasion. It seemed the problem with the obedient officers had been resolved. All three officers had long been overdue for promotion, and a negative review of their behavior and performance from Captain Jenkins could push them to the bottom of the list. At worst, it could be used as a deterrent. Need volunteers to investigate the border ghosts? Well, you go. You and you. But there was another obstacle. None of them had ever flown faster-than-light ships before. How long would it take Sonya to need a ship? Would there be time to even briefly train them to fly them? Of course, his fleet had qualified people, but they were all too busy and couldn't be pulled away from their regular duties. He was just contemplating the situation when Commander Verrill appeared. She entered his office and handed him a long envelope. "The order has come, Commander." Grims took the envelope and began to examine it carefully. It bore the Confederate coat of arms. "Well, will you finally open it?" "What's the rush?" he grumbled. But he slid the envelope open with a letter opener carved from the bone of a sea unicorn from the planet Melisande and pulled out the contents. Unfolding the paper, he skimmed the jumble of official phrases, trying to grasp the essence. Following a conversation between the president of the Confederation of Frontier Planets and the ambassador of the Interstellar Federation, it was agreed that the Confederation would provide the Federation Patrol Service with all possible support. Commander Grims is authorized to negotiate directly with Commander Verrill regarding the selection of the necessary vessel for the mission and the recruitment of a crew. Grims read, but suddenly his eyebrows rose in surprise. Commander Grimes was permitted to leave his post for an indefinite period and was to hand over all duties to Captain Farley as soon as possible. Commander Grimes was appointed captain of a vessel hired by the Patrol Service and was to protect Confederate interests during the expedition. Grims chuckled and looked askance at Sonya. "This is your doing, isn't it?" "Partly mine. The main reason is that your government doesn't want to hand over one of its most precious ships to a foreigner." But why me? Sonya chuckled. You see, I said that if the ship's captain is to be a Confederate representative, then I too have the right to oversee the treaty's implementation. We've come to the conclusion that there's only one reliable and trustworthy candidate. She seemed a little confused. John, aren't you happy? That's putting it mildly, he replied emphatically, and seeing her expression, he smiled. To be honest, Sonya, even before you arrived, I told myself I was damn tired of dealing with bureaucracy at this desk. Your crazy idea will have a better effect on me than any vacation. She's not crazy, Sonya objected.
No? Hunting interstellar ghosts isn't crazy.
John, you know as well as I do that ghosts are an objective phenomenon. They relate to paranormal physical phenomena in the same way that paranormal psychology exists. It's long past time to start researching them, and if you or your people are too busy, someone else will do it. Grims laughed. Okay. I've never seen the border ghosts myself, but it's not like you can't joke around. Before Miss Willoughby returns and starts rearranging my papers to please Captain Farley, and she should be back soon, we can discuss the details. I think we'll need a faster-than-light ship. The Cutty Sark will be arriving shortly, and that's just what we need. No, I don't need a faster-than-light ship. But it seemed to me that he would be the one suitable for our research. I know about Captain Listwell's crazy journey and what happened to him and his crew, but there's one obstacle. When the area crossed the border into a parallel time dimension, the entire crew, in a sense, changed their personalities. I want to remain myself in another dimension. So what kind of ship do you need? She looked out the window. I hoped that the Seeker would be free, but he really is free. And besides, it's better equipped than your merchant ships. A mass proximity indicator, for example. Yes. Carlotti's communication system and core spotting equipment. Yes. Is it possible to install a sufficiently large storage facility for antimatter steel? Grimm smiled. I see your intelligence service isn't as well informed as it usually appears. The Seeker doesn't have such a device, as it's not designed for travel far from populated areas. But there's a sphere of this material in orbit, and the Seeker could capture it en route. You of course know how it works. Antimatter in a neutron shell, then a steel casing with powerful permanent magnets built in to prevent the antimatter from coming into contact with normal matter. A neutrino bombardment is enough, and voila! Anti-gravity is in operation. In fact, the Seeker's conversion was initiated because the ship could be used to study the problems that arise when installing an anti-gravity system on a ship with a conventional interstellar drive. Good. Let your mechanics handle the sphere installation, and ours will make some adjustments to the Carlotti system. Several people should be arriving from Elsinore soon. By the way, how are things with the crew? Everything is fine, but what do you mean by changes? I need to know, because after the flight, everything will need to be restored to its original order. Don't worry about that. We can even install new equipment. She fell silent and looked thoughtfully at the coffee machine. Grims immediately filled 2 cups. Well, John, I imagine you're eager to find out what happens to your beloved Seeker, not to mention you, me, and those fellows who'll be flying with us. Frankly, I'm eager too. I can fly a ship well enough to justify the title of a dutiful pilot, but that's all. In any case, some errors and surprises are to be expected, but once all the necessary adjustments are made, we'll head to where the ghosts are most frequently encountered. It would be better if the crew had already encountered these phenomena. That's why I selected them, Grims added. Excellent. We'll calmly fly sector by sector, but stay alert. As soon as we get a vision, we'll activate our system. Do you want to open fire on them? No, of course not. But we must take certain actions, even if they're not entirely correct. The officer on duty will activate the system that turns the ship into a powerful electromagnet, and simultaneously, the emergency alarm will sound. The Carlotti emitter will automatically direct the electromagnetic field to draw the ghost ship into it. Specialists have told me that this could create a temporary bridge across the chasm separating the neighboring worlds. I understand. Since the Seeker will act as a giant magnet, the alien ship will jump across the bridge into our universe. No, she said impatiently. Have you forgotten about anti-gravity and antimatter? Our ship will be a huge magnet, but it won't have any significant mass, so it will be the one rushing through this gap or opening, call it what you will. And how are we going to get back? Grims asked. To be honest, even I myself don't understand it very well, she admitted. The commander laughed. We'll have to recruit people who aren't tied to anything here. And he added sadly, people like me. And so am I, John, she replied. Chapter 5. Captain Farley was clearly displeased at being recalled from leave, but relented when Grimes assured him he would be amply rewarded. After spending just enough time with the captain to avoid being considered impolite, Grimes left him to sort out the arrival and departure schedules with Miss Willoughby's help, and immersed himself fully in organizing the expedition. He was irritated that so much time was wasted on bureaucratic red tape. The charter agreement for the ship needed to be finalized, and the resistance of Lloyd's inspectors had to be overcome. They refused to release a ship equipped with both the Mansion navigation system and the anti-gravity system, not to mention the undisclosed modifications to the Carlotti instruments. Eventually, Sonya Verrill brought pressure through the patrol service, and the gentlemen from Lloyd's had to leave grumbling. Recruiting the crew was also a challenge. The Mammoth's 2nd, 3rd and 4th officers readily agreed to serve as 1st, 2nd and 3rd officers. The psionic officer was happy to accompany them. The supply chief and chief engineer selected personnel from their departments, but the Institute of Space Engineers balked, demanding a risk premium of 150% of the contractual compensation for their men. Grims almost agreed to their terms. After all, it was Federation taxpayers' money, but then backed out. He gracefully circumvented the obstacle by convincing the Minister of Space Communications and the Minister of Rocket Ships to consider the Seeker an auxiliary military vessel, and that all reserve officers should therefore be recalled by special order. The Institute, too, was forced to withdraw, grumbling. In truth, Grims was even pleased to have been forced to take this step. If the Seeker had been considered merely a merchant vessel, his own legal status would have been no higher than that of a ship's commander. Now, however, he was a commander on active duty, and as such, he stood out among all the other ship's commanders, even though he wore the same cap badge as them. Naturally, therefore, he felt happy. Finally, after numerous frustrating delays, the Seeker was relocated to the launch pad of Lorne's spaceport. A tired and irritated Grimes finally gave the order to take off to Senior Lieutenant Swinton of the Navy, former 2nd officer of the Mammoth. Swinton, blonde, frail, and in his new uniform looking more like a schoolboy than a pilot, handled the controls perfectly. The aged Seeker, at first slowly, then with increasing speed, cut through the layers of the atmosphere and finally entered orbit. The approach trajectory was calculated quite precisely. If it had been calculated any more precisely, we would have rammed our anti-gravity sphere and suffered the same fate as the ghosts, Grimes commented. Approaching the glittering steel sphere required little effort. A whole team of specialists was on board to inspect and secure the sphere. Watching their work in outer space was a true pleasure. First, the sphere was secured in a specially designed location. Then it was the physicists' turn. Reaching out with their instruments, they placed the antimatter steel ball in a neutrino stream. At the same time, 2 orbital transport ships pumped tons of water into special tanks on the Seeker. This, Grims explained to his officers, was necessary to prevent the ship's mass from becoming negative and falling out of orbit before the work was completed. Finally, everything was ready. The ship was fully equipped and all maintenance personnel had moved to the orbital station. Grims took the seat of senior pilot. Through the portholes, the edge of Lorne was visible, as always covered in dirty grey clouds. Looking out, Grims told himself he wouldn't be upset if he never saw it again. Ahead, slightly to the right, Melissa gleamed with a yellowish light. The commander's short fingers ran lightly across the instrument panel keyboard. The dull sound of spinning gyroscopes came from behind the bulkheads, and the ship began to rotate around its vertical axis. Now the sun of Lorne shone ahead. "Lieutenant Swinton, sound the siren," Grimes said. A sharp signal sounded, an endless series of Morse code R's, meaning "Prepare to launch rocket engines." A minute later, the siren suddenly stopped. With a theatrical gesture, Grimes pressed the launch button, and immediately an invisible but powerful hand of acceleration pressed all the ship's passengers deep into their soft seats. Grimes watched the second hand on the clock, located directly in front of him on the dashboard. After a certain amount of time, raising his hand with great effort, he pressed the button again. At that very moment, Swinton's command rang out. "Launch of the Manshen system."
The sound of the rocket launchers died away, and the ship was filled with a piercing whine of spinning compression gyroscopes. To the right, in the porthole, the vast nebulous wheel of the galaxy began to warp before our eyes. Numerous bright stars merged into multicolored bands. Directly ahead, Melissa's sun spun like a spiral. Grimes felt proud of himself and his comrades. The expedition was off to a successful start. He glanced at Sonya, wanting to know what she was thinking. Sonya, smiling, asked him, "Everything all right, sir? Shall we celebrate a successful start?" She added, "After all, it's the Federation taxpayers who pay for it." Grimes happily agreed and gave the appropriate orders. Everyone, except the watch officers, gathered in the wardroom. Karen Schmidt, the supply officer, handed out spherical cups of drinks. When everyone had been served, Grimes glanced around. He wanted to offer a toast, but he lacked the necessary succinctness, and the words that came to mind were ponderous and banal. Finally, he cleared his throat and said in a hoarse voice, "So, ladies and gentlemen, our expedition has begun successfully. Perhaps anyone would like to comment on this?" At that moment, young Swinton sat up straight in his chair, since in zero gravity, naturally, one cannot drink standing up, raised his spherical glass and solemnly said, "To the opening of the season of crazy ghost hunting." Everyone laughed, but Sonya, Grimes noted, resisted the general mirth. Even during the expedition's preparations, he'd been constantly convinced that this wasn't just a game for her. This flight into the unknown, and perhaps the unknowable, was the result of months of effort on her part. Nevertheless, he joined in the toast and added, "To a successful hunt." He took a sip from his glass and glanced at the others. It occurred to him that for an event like their flight, it would be hard to find more suitable participants. Each of them had earned their reputations in the Frontier Fleet. Perhaps not particularly stellar, but not particularly bad either. Generally speaking, they had always approached their service from the standpoint of maximizing profit with minimal expenditure. Now, since the Federation was footing the bill, expenses were less of a concern, and there was no need to fear tiresome inquiries about excessive fuel consumption. As for the patrol service personnel who maintained Carlotti's device, Grimes relied entirely on Sonya. They were her subordinates, and he hoped she would keep them in check. Grimes offered to fill the glasses again, and unbuckling his belt, carefully rose to his feet, keeping his magnetic boots on the floor. "I ask all unit commanders to assemble in my cabin in 15 minutes, he said. In the shaft, without using the spiral staircase, he quickly climbed to the next floor along the central metal rod. His trembling told him someone was following him. Lowering his head, he wasn't entirely surprised to see Sonya. In Grimes's office, she sat down opposite him at his desk. "It's not funny, John. What we are doing isn't a joke." "Ghost hunting, you mean? I thought it was clever." "Yes, I know you're pursuing your own personal goals, but we, myself included, are prepared to sacrifice our lives for this. I believe your people are here on duty." "No, they are also volunteers." "Well then, don't take everything too seriously. We'll all do our best. However, I don't think anyone except me knows your personal motives." She smiled sadly. "You're right, of course, John, but—" There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Grimes shouted. All the ship's officers began to enter, Swinton, followed by the stocky red-haired senior navigation engineer, Manshena Calhoun, and the thin, balding rocket engineer, McHenry. They were followed by the awkward, sleepy-looking Mayhew, the Psi radio station officer, the plum financier, Petersham,
and the short, fair-haired Karen Schmidt. Last to enter were the short, lively ship surgeon, Todd Hunter, and Renfrew, the patrol lieutenant in charge of the Carlotti system. "You may smoke," Grimm said when everyone had sat down and fastened their seatbelts with practiced movements. Having filled and lit his pipe, he continued, "I hope it's clear to everyone that we are not on a trading voyage. In some ways, I think we are reminiscent of those famous pirates of the good old days. Like Black Bart or Scourge, we plow through space, waiting for lucrative loot."
Black Bart, however, didn't have to hunt ghosts.
"I think we would have to, sir," Swinton interposed, "if ghosts had money." "Money can be found anywhere, even on a ghost," added McHenry, "if you just look hard enough." This was too much. Sonya couldn't take it anymore and said in an icy voice, "For your information, gentlemen, we are not considering financial matters here. This expedition is purely scientific in nature." "Really, Commander Verrill?" Grims asked sardonically. "I'm sure we wouldn't have received the support of your and our governments if the politicians hadn't seen the potential to profit from our discoveries. Just imagine, expanded trade between alternate universes." "If we find the alternate universe," Calhoun said. "What do you mean by that? I thought many of you here had actually seen border ghosts." "Certainly, sir.
But we must not overlook the possibility that our ghosts are simply wraiths, in the most old-fashioned sense of the word."
"We'll keep that in mind," Graham said sharply. "But even if it is, we'll try to expand the boundaries of human knowledge." He took a deep drag and blew out a large cloud of blue smoke. "We, gentlemen, are to act like pirates. Each of you is to keep your subordinates on constant alert. Games of all kinds, such as 3D tic-tac-toe, are now prohibited. Commander Swinton, that includes you." Swinton blushed. This was his favorite pastime, and it constantly angered the captain and senior officer on the Mammoth. "And you, Commander Calhoun, try not to fill the Manshena system control panel with all sorts of cheap novels and magazines with beautiful girls on the covers." It was Calhoun's turn to blush. "Yes, Commander McHenry, the rocket engine was in perfect working order upon takeoff. I'll give you a few hours to get it back up and running."
"When I look in your room, I don't want to find a warehouse of spare parts that you're converting into a working engine 5 seconds before crashing onto some planet."
The doctor, the purser, and the supply chief exchanged wary glances, but the captain next took aim at the SciComm officer. "Mr. Mayhew, I understand you're not above chatting with a colleague halfway across the galaxy. On this mission, you'll be communicating only as scheduled and as directed by me." "Whatever you say, boss," Mayhew replied sleepily, but realizing what he had said, he perked up. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. You can count on me, sir." Glancing briefly at Todd Hunter, Petersham, and Schmidt, Grimm said, "I think we can leave it at that. Commander Verrill, is there anything you'd like to add?" "It seems you've made it all quite clear to your officers. I'm sure Mr. Renfrew will take the same to heart." "Okay, I think we've cleared everything up."
"I think, sir," said Calhoun suddenly, "that we should take a priest with us. He could do the evocations if necessary."
"Summoning the border ghosts," Sonya replied. "We'll do that last." Chapter 6. Their flight continued for quite a long time. The ship's main chronometer ticked away the seconds, minutes, hours, days, but not a single ghost was spotted. The crew went about their usual spaceflight routine. At first, duties were carried out according to a strict schedule. Then, to break the monotony, watch times were chosen at random. One such day, Grims discussed the situation with Sonya Verrill. "I looked through all the records, but I couldn't find any indication," he said. "But we've already found it. At least, that's what all the crew members who've ever seen the ghost say." Yes, I know.
But what precise physical conditions must be established for the most favorable encounter?
What, for example, is the initial velocity and the time compression? As far as I know, such things have never been recorded, although their combination could be very specific. Yes, but perhaps the issue here is not the ship, but the peculiarities of the region of space where it is located. And what are these features?
This is exactly what we need to discover. After a pause, Grimm said, "You know, Sonya, I think we're on the wrong track. We're trying to work with technicians and equipment, and what then? But it would be worthwhile. Probably it would be worthwhile to use the best of all existing devices, the human mind." "What do you mean?" "It appears this Calhoun guy wasn't entirely wrong. He won't be surprised, of course, if I tell you that I have a detailed file on each of my officers on my computer. Well, I just finished going through them, hoping to identify some patterns. As you know, every one of our officers has observed ghosts at least once in the past. Now, recall Mr. Calhoun's remark at our first meeting. Yes, he said that the ghosts are perhaps real wraiths. Be that as it may, Calhoun was born in the Confederacy on Ultimo, but his parents were immigrants. They came from Douglas. Do you know what Douglas is?" "I was there once. It's a strange world. The people in power there are a theocracy, if that's the right word, and it's called the United Reformed Spiritualist Church. It rules there, just like any other government in any other country. Of course, the church persecutes its heretics, like Calhoun's parents. Apparently, their home was haunted by spirits, so they called in an underground exorcist. This was forbidden, and they were persecuted, so they were forced to emigrate. It turns out you can be a heretic without being an atheist or an agnostic. The Calhouns simply wanted to believe, but to believe in their own way, and they raised their only son in the family tradition." "So what then? Have you ever wondered to what extent physical phenomena, except of course telepathy, telekinesis, and teleportation, to what extent do they belong to our world? Perhaps they penetrated to us from an alternate universe." I must admit, such a thing never occurred to me. I've never been much of an expert in such areas. But if we decide to hold a séance, where will we find a medium? We have Mr. Mayhew." "Yes, but as you know, the professors at the Space Research Center claim there's nothing supernatural about their students' talents. Besides, you can be telepathic, but not clairvoyant." "Is it possible, Sonya? I'm not sure. I recall only a few cases of clairvoyance, and many of them can be explained by telepathy. Cases of predicting the future can be explained by telepathic communication with another universe where the timeline is slightly shifted. Ghosts are a supernatural phenomenon, and if we acknowledge, even if only verbally, the existence of a supernatural religion, it will only help us in our work. You outrank me, John, and you're the ship's commander, but I don't like this idea." "Do you think it's not worth dealing with the supernatural?" "To be honest, yes." "I don't think so. What is considered natural and what is supernatural? Can you draw the line? I can't." "Okay then." She unbuckled her seatbelt and slid out of the chair, hovering above the floor. Then the gentle pull of her magnetic soles pulled her down. "Okay, John, do what you can, but do something. You know how much time and effort I've spent convincing our politicians to invest time and money in what your Swinton called the opening of the mad hunting season. We won't have another chance to get results, and I need results, and you know what they are. Just don't call in outside help." "We won't do that. Our people on the ship will take care of everything. We'll try to create the most favorable conditions for penetration from one universe to the other." "As you say," she gave a short laugh. "After all, people have been selling their souls to the devil since the dawn of humanity." Grimm said irritably, "But we're not going to sell our souls to the devil. What's so bad, after all, if Calhoun thinks he's converted a few people to the faith of his fathers?" He picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Mr. Mayhew? Commander Grimes. Could you spare me a few minutes?" Then he dialed another number. "Commander Calhoun? Commander Grimes. Would you be so kind as to come and see me?" Sonya Verrill sat back down in her chair and buckled her seatbelt. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door.
Mayhew was the first to appear. As always, he looked sloppy, his shirt unbuttoned, his hair tousled, and his gaze unfocused. Stifling a yawn, he asked, "Yes, sir?" "Please sit down." There was a knock on the door again.
"Come in." Calhoun appeared, carefully wiping his hands with a handkerchief. He too was offered a seat.
"Commander Calhoun," Grimes said, "you were raised in the faith of the United Reformed Spiritualist Church, were you not?" "No, sir." His answer was emphatically negative. "I was raised in the faith of the United Orthodox Spiritualist Church." He noticed that his answer slightly confused Grimes and added, "It should be said, sir, that there are people, my parents among them, who advocate a return to the old beliefs, to the only true religion. They advocate the right to exorcise spirits, for example." "Yes, Commander, I understand. But do you personally believe in the existence of border ghosts?" "Of course, sir, although it's not yet clear whether they are manifestations of good or evil. If they are, then they can be summoned with the help of an exorcist." "Yes, of course. Of course, not everyone on this ship shares your view of this phenomenon, but you must agree, it's essential to establish contact with at least one apparition. That, after all, is the goal of the expedition. And if such contact is established..." Grimes paused. "If such contact is established, it could be of benefit to your church." "Exactly so, sir." "Maybe you could help us establish contact." "What, sir?" "I don't think my installation's intervention could have produced any results." "That's not what I meant. But your church has certain rituals." "You mean a spiritualistic seance?" "But I don't have the powers of a medium, otherwise I would have made a career as a priest and wouldn't be here." "But you know the ritual itself?" "Yes, sir. I am familiar with the rites and ceremonies, but it's all useless without a medium." "We have a medium," Grimes said, nodding at the almost asleep Mayhew. The Psi radio officer winced and blurted out, "Nothing of the sort. I'm an engineer, not a fortune-teller." "My apologies, sir. I meant to say that our center has always been against such superstitions." "Religion is not superstition, you sleepy idiot." Gentlemen, Grimes reassured them. "I remind you that you must maintain discipline, and that I could order you, Commander Calhoun, and you, Mr. Mayhew, to organize a seance." "Sir, even on a ship there are things you cannot order," Calhoun replied sharply, his face suddenly white. "Any command the ship's captain gives during a flight is valid," Grimes said coldly. "But I haven't forgotten the rule that has come down to us from the depths of time, when people crossed seas and oceans in wooden ships, and which states, 'One volunteer is worth 10 subordinates in command.' I am sure you won't hesitate long to take part in an experiment that will convert many people to your faith." "Of course, sir, from that point of view, but..." "And you, Mayhew, will of course do everything in your power. This will, after all, reflect on the reputation of your center." "Sir, these superstitions..." "Mayhew, if you say that word again," Calhoun said menacingly. "Commander, remember where you are. Mr. Mayhew, I ask that you respect the beliefs of others. If my request is not sufficient, I will order you, with appropriate consequences for failure to comply." Both fell silent, offended. Grimes continued. "Calhoun, I authorize you to make the necessary preparations, and you, Mr. Mayhew, will assist Commander Calhoun in this. Now, let's celebrate the beginning of your very unusual activity." When both subordinates, quite warmed up by drinks and already almost friends, left, Sonya said, "You're skillful at using both carrot and stick. I hope it will produce results." "I hope this will bring the desired results," Grimes replied. "We don't need just any ghosts, after all." "No," Sonya sighed, her face distorted and pale. "No." Preparations for the session took longer than Grimes expected. It was clear that Calhoun, equally religious and knowledgeable, would observe every detail of the ritual. The longest part was creating the harmonium, which required sacrificing part of the keyboard of the synthesizer in the wardroom, reducing its range from 7.5 octaves to 5. The workshop provided the necessary bellows and brass tubes. The ivory from the extra keys was used to make various levers. Grimes watched with interest as the archaic instrument was created and listened to the first sounds, reminiscent of a cat's squeal. "We have to get a raspy sound," Calhoun insisted. As the instrument began to take shape, Grimes finally resigned himself to the sacrifice of the synthesizer, which had enlivened many evenings on long journeys aboard the Seeker, which he had previously participated in. After all, the idea of the séance was his own, and he felt no right to object. Next came the wardroom's turn to be refurbished. The cozy, soft chairs were replaced with hard metal benches. The walls were draped with sheets dyed dark grey using a special compound from Dr. Todd Hunter and Karen Schmidt's stockpile. The switches were replaced with dimmers, and several lamps emitting a dim red glow were installed. A high-pitched trumpet and tambourine were also fabricated and painted with the pattern of luminous paint. Finally, everything was ready. Grims summoned the senior lieutenant. "Commander Swinton, the session is scheduled for today, 9 p.m. ship time. Make sure everyone is informed." "Yes, sir. And stop grinning stupidly." "I beg your pardon, sir. You must admit, this is really starting to look like a crazy ghost hunt." From Commander Calhoun's perspective, this isn't a crazy undertaking at all. He believes we've abandoned all this scientific nonsense and returned to the tried and true old methods of his religion. To some extent, the remedy has already worked. It's created the necessary atmosphere, and perhaps we'll achieve something more. This will be an interesting experiment. Yes, and I'm glad that Mr. Mayhew agreed to take part in it. Does he really have the talent of a medium, sir? There must be. What is a medium if not a telepath? Perhaps, sir. Perhaps. Commander Calhoun didn't try to convert you to his faith? Oh, he did a good job. I readily believe that his church, Orthodox or Reformed, has achieved some interesting phenomena, but I'm not at all convinced they are any more supernatural than ghosts. I can't understand why the research center hasn't yet incorporated spiritualism into its scientific research. Because they are not allowed to. They're doing science after all. And you know what the church says about that. There are some things we shouldn't know. Faith is everything, and knowledge is from the devil, and so on. So whenever a researcher tries to penetrate the church's circle, they're immediately rebuffed. In that case, I don't understand how Calhoun could voluntarily take part in the expedition. Nothing surprising. He has his own goals. He hopes to discover something useful to his church. Remote-controlled exorcisms, for example. But there will be science involved in this, won't there? Yes, but as a servant, not a rival. I think I understand. The young man continued to hesitate. May I go, sir? Yes, thank you, Swinton. Wait, just a few more words. As soon as this experiment is complete, return the wardroom to its original appearance. With great pleasure, sir. That evening, Grims dined with Sonya in his office. The wardroom clearly couldn't boast of amenities. Together, they enjoyed simple but well-prepared dishes and wines from the commander's personal supply. Over dinner, they chatted to the accompaniment of soft music. Then, when Grimes brought 2 glasses of dessert wine and a case of excellent Coribay cigars, the conversation turned to serious matters. Frankly speaking, John, I'm afraid, said Sonya. Why, Sonya? As long as everything was going according to plan, it was all fine, because it was in line with what I was aiming for. It really was like playing pirates. You point the Carlotti searchlight like a real gun, and boom, you're dead. And now, I told you I was on Danglas. It's a dreary world. The towns are a scattering of tiny houses and barns where services are held. There's a constant feeling of being watched disapprovingly by millions of spirits. I went to 1 or 2 services, partly out of curiosity, partly because I am, after all, an intelligence officer. An unnaturally cold room with similar people singing dreary hymns, dim lighting, and a voice coming from nowhere, talking about the most trivial things. I remember what happened next well." The voice was rough and masculine, though the medium was a small, downtrodden woman. The man sitting next to me whispered that it was Red Eagle, the master spirit. He also said that this Red Eagle had been an American Indian in life. I was surprised that he had flown so far from home, but then I realized that time and distance don't exist for ghosts, and several light years are nothing to them. The voice said, "Today we have a stranger with us, a woman who flew from the sky." Okay, many of those present might know who I am. The voice continued, "I have a message for her. I see a ship falling into the void, further and further. It's falling where the dim, rare stars are. I see the ship's name written in gold letters on the side. I can read it. Outsider." At that time, it didn't mean anything to me. "I see a brave captain in a black and gold uniform. You know him." And he described the captain's appearance, and I recognized him as Derek Culver. You know, I first met Derek when he was second mate on the Lawn Lady. There's another man there. He was once a captain too. He's frightened and disgraced, locked in his cabin. And again came the description, meticulously detailed, right down to the laser burn on his left buttock and the mole under his belly button. It was Maudsley, Bill Maudsley. He's sick, he's scared, and he knows he's left you forever. He has a bottle in front of him, he drinks from it, and the spilled liquid floats around him in tiny drops. He looks at the empty bottle and curses, then throws it against the wall. He holds a sharp shard in his hand, and he draws it across his throat. I wanted to question him in the ensuing silence, but I couldn't in front of all those people. There was nothing more. Red Eagle told me everything that concerned me, and then moved on to the usual messages to the other members of the community. Bill Brown's grandmother was worried about him for not wearing a warm coat, and Jimmy Smith's aunt informed me that trade would increase next year, and so on. And after this meeting, or service, I had a conversation with the minister. He was very welcoming and arranged for me to have a private meeting with a medium, but it wasn't the same. Red Eagle seemed annoyed at being called, as he'd already said everything he wanted. He added only that I would have to search long and far, but that I wouldn't find what I was looking for. Should I begin my search by becoming a ghost myself prematurely? I hope not. I love life and its pleasures too much for that. I love good food, wine, tobacco, books, music, good clothes, and everything else that exists in life. It's too unclear what happens afterward. Oh, I hear a whole chorus of objections. It's nice, beautiful, and everyone's happy there. But I've always had the impression that that other life would lack originality, brightness, and of course, all our carnal pleasures. I was unpleasantly shocked after the session. But maybe this can be explained by telepathy. No, John, you can't. I wasn't thinking about Bill Maudsley at the time, until the news came through during the session, and even after that, I kept thinking about Derek Culver. I didn't know Bill had flown with him as an assistant, and I didn't even know how he died. I didn't officially know for several months until confirmation came, but I decided to check. I dug up all the flight data from one of the computers at the spaceport, and I found a specialist who checked everything again through his own channels. The answer was unequivocal. Bill said goodbye to this life at the very moment I sat in this assembly hall on Douglas. Perhaps you shouldn't take part in the seance, Sonya, Grimes told her, and leave him to the mercy of your lousy cultists, she snapped. No, sir, thank you. Chapter 8. Approaching the wardroom, Grimes and Sonya found everything there in perfect readiness. Everyone sat on benches arranged in several rows, in front of which stood a table, 3 chairs, and the harmonium. It was a good thing, Grimes thought, that the ship was weightless and they wouldn't have to suffer sitting on these benches. They'd only have to buckle up to avoid floating away. Calhoun, who, despite his uniform, looked like an implacable oppositionist, took one of the seats at the table. Mayhew, who this time looked more embarrassed than sleepy, sat in the second chair. Karen Schmidt settled down near the musical instrument.
As soon as Grimes and Sonya took their places in the front row, Calhoun unbuckled his belt, rose carefully to his feet, and spoke in a voice more like the bray of an angry donkey than the humble bleat of a preacher. "Oh, brothers, we, pathetic seekers of truth, have gathered here to humbly ask our loved ones in the other world to shed a little light into our darkened minds. We ask them for help, but we are also ready to help them. We will cast aside our doubts and embrace the simple faith of a child. We must believe." He continued in a more human voice. "I assure you, this is the most important thing. We must open our hearts and souls to the gracious power of the other world. Tune yourself to the perception of these unknown forces. We must create the necessary conditions, even if we do not succeed immediately." Meanwhile, one of the assistants was distributing printed sheets of paper to those present. Grims glanced at them. They were the lyrics to hymns. "Oh, brothers," cried Calhoun, "let us sing the first hymn."
Karen Schmidt hesitated slightly with the harmonium. The pedals, which were attached to the bellows, were a bit awkward to operate in zero-gravity conditions. Finally, she succeeded, and the sharp, loud opening chord rang out. Everyone began to sing at once to the hoarse accompaniment of the instrument. "Lead me, sacred light, lead me forward, amidst the darkness of emptiness, to where happiness awaits." When the hymn ended, Calhoun began to pray. Grimes, despite his unbelief, was deeply impressed by the sincerity of the prayer. He even decided that it would be a good idea for him to believe in something too. The second hymn sounded, and the light slowly faded until only the red lamps remained. On the table, the speaking trumpet and tambourine glowed eerily with their luminous paint. Suddenly, a strange calm descended on the wardroom. The distant echo of the instruments only heightened the silence. It was very calm and very cold.
"Is the cold physical or psychological?" Grims asked himself, unable to answer.
His eyes adjusted to the dim light. He spotted Calhoun and Mayhew sitting motionless at the table, and Karen Schmidt bent over the harmonium. He glanced at Sonya. She was so pale she almost glowed in the darkness. He felt her hand and shook it. Sonya returned the squeeze gratefully. Mayhew coughed and said, "It seems like something is coming to me." "Yes?" Calhoun whispered. "Now?" Mayhew chuckled. "A typical message, it seems. Flora MacDonald. Do you hear her? She lived on Earth in the 18th century. She's a Jacobean heroine," Calhoun insisted. Mayhew chuckled again. "Not that Flora MacDonald, that other one. It's a cargo ship flying from New Caledonia. There it is again. I can hear the signal perfectly. It seems everyone gathered here is helping me receive it."
"Mr. Mayhew, you are destroying the necessary atmosphere."
"Commander Calhoun, I agreed to take part in this experiment, knowing that it would be just an experiment." Something clinked softly. Both men, their argument forgotten, stared at the tambourine lying on the table. It, demagnetized from the table's steel surface, slowly rose and, gently swaying, floated toward the air intake vent. It was near the floor, on the other side of the wardroom, and the tambourine was slowly floating towards it, carried away by the current of air. Grims was disappointed. This wasn't the best time for such experiments. Telekinesis wasn't widespread among spacefarers, but it did occur. He knew there was only one person on the ship with such a gift, and Grims wouldn't wait long after the session to summon him to his room. But, after all, this is the third mate who's currently on watch, and besides, the experiments we've conducted have proven he's not all that adept at this.
So, the tambourine's flight is simply a consequence of the air circulation in the cabin.
The harmonium wheezed discordantly. Calhoun jumped up in a rage. "Can't you be more serious about this? This is a religious service, after all. Miss Schmidt, stop that noise immediately, right now. Lights! Turn on the lights!" The lights flared brightly. The tambourine hung motionless in the air, like an ordinary object in zero gravity. The air current slowly, almost imperceptibly, moved him toward the ventilation pipes. But Karen Schmidt, at the harmonium, twitched convulsively, her feet pressing hard against the bellows, her fingers slapping the keyboard haphazardly. A blank expression froze on her face, and tiny droplets of drool flew from her open mouth with each sharp exhalation. Grims rose from his seat. "Dr. Todhunter, look! What's wrong with Miss Schmidt?" Suddenly Calhoun calmed down. "No," he whispered furiously. "No, everyone sit down right now." "She's just like that woman," Sonya said quietly. "Let me pass," Todhunter tried to get to Miss Schmidt. Suddenly, Karen Schmidt spoke, but it was a rough male voice. At first, it seemed to be speaking an unknown yet terribly familiar language. Then she managed to discern a few words. "You're falling. You're falling. In the night and the void, you search and fall. I look at you, and I don't care whether you search and find, or search and lose. I am an observer." Calhoun entered the conversation. "Who are you?" "I am an observer." "Do you have a message?" "I don't have a message," came the laughter, which seemed to come from all sides. "Why should I have a message?" "Tell us, will we succeed?" "Why should I tell you? Why should you succeed? What is success and what is failure?" "But there must be a message." Calhoun's initial deference gave way to irritation. Grimes was reminded of ancient tribes who would knock over and beat their wooden idols if they failed. Thunderous laughter again. "Poor little man, what do you want to know? The day and hour of your death, to spend the rest of your life in fear, trying to avoid the inevitable?" The medium's hands began to play the instrument, but what came out were not wild raspy chords, but the sounds of a magnificent organ. It was the Death March. "Is this the message you wanted to receive?" Sonya Verrill straightened up and shouted. "Is that all you can say? Is it the limit of your knowledge to tell us what we already know, that we will all die one day?" The laughter rang out one last time, and the voice said calmly, "Here is your message." A general alarm sounded, dot dash, the letter A in Morse code. It was the signal that the border ghost detection system had been activated. Chapter 9. It was visible from the side porthole. It was a perfectly ordinary ship, maintaining the same speed and temporal compression as the Seeker, and there was nothing unusual about it, except that the radar and mass proximity indicator screens were completely blank. The Carlotti system's antenna, like a huge futuristic gun, was already aimed at the neighboring ship, and the roar of the generators, transforming the Seeker into a giant solenoid, could already be heard through the ringing alarms. "There's nothing on the screen, sir," said the third mate. "The receiver is silent too." Swinton examined the ship through a huge pair of binoculars on a stand. "I think I can make out the name. Ranger." "Interesting," said Grimes. "This is the ship I was planning to add to our fleet." "Call them with a light alarm, sir?" "No. If all goes well, we'll talk to them soon in the usual way." "Ready, Mr. Renfrew?" "Ready, sir," replied the patrol lieutenant. "Okay." Grimes couldn't find the right word to give the command. He wanted to say "fire," but that wasn't the case. "Contact," Sonya prompted. Renfrew, seated behind the screen, kept an eye on the target, ensuring it remained in the crosshairs. One of his subordinates read the instrument's readings. 25, 50, 75, 85, 90, 95, 6, 7, 8, 9. There was a long pause. The men at Carlotti's instrument chatted quietly. Swinton, monitoring the other ship, announced, "He's making light signals. Looks like Morse code." "Done," Renfrew shouted. "Come on." Carlotti's instrument howled and crackled, and the man standing next to it sneezed as a blast of ozone hit his nose. The tension was unbearable, and Grimes suddenly noticed that everything around him was doubling. Every person, everything, was seen twice. But there was something unnerving about this doubling. Grimes winced when he saw that one of the two Swintons remained watching through binoculars, while the other turned to Renfrew and his team. One of the Renfrews leaned both hands on the dashboard, while the other, sneezing, wiped his nose with a handkerchief. The oral confusion grew, just like in an old Irish parliament, when everyone talks and no one listens, Grimes thought for some reason. He began to feel unbearable pain, as if his brain was being stretched on a rack, stretched, until something suddenly snapped. Another ship, the Ranger, was now clearly visible through the portholes. It was close, too close, and continued to grow menacingly before our eyes. A voice, eerily similar to Swinton's, came from the radio speaker. "Idiots, what are you doing there?" Grimes suddenly realized he was sitting in the captain's chair, though he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there. There was only one way to avoid a collision: engage the thrusters. He hesitated for a split second before pressing the button. A mass release during the Manshen navigation system's activation could have unpredictable consequences. But there was no choice. Even with the solenoid deactivated, the residual magnetism was too strong to attempt any collision avoidance. A brief buzzing sound came from the stern. The ship rocked slightly, but it was enough to throw anyone not secured off balance and slam into the bulkheads. There was nothing beyond the portholes. No strange ship, no galaxy elongated into a large lens, no stars, no nebulae. It was the last night. Chapter 10. Several hours later, everyone came to the dismal conclusion that they were in the absolute void. Their signaling devices, physical or psychic, were completely useless, as were their navigational ones. There was nothing around them to talk about, or anything to hold on to. They seemed to be falling, but through what? To where? At a speed faster than light. But where they were, there was no light. There was no point of departure, no point of arrival. After consulting with his senior officers, Grims ordered the mansion's navigation system shut down. They had nowhere to go, and there was no point in wasting energy and spinning the gyroscopes. He then called a general meeting in the wardroom. Naturally, the gloomy atmosphere left over from the mediumistic seance still reigned. The trumpet remained lying on the table, and the tambourine stuck to the air vent. This time, Grimes and Sonya sat at the table. Pale and confused after the seance in which she had unwittingly found herself the main character, Karen Schmidt sat back down by the harmonium. Grimes looked at her in surprise and shrugged. She hadn't really had to sit there. When everyone had gathered, Grimes asked for silence. "Gentlemen, you may smoke, but I would like to remind you that it may take quite a long time before we replenish our supplies." He grinned as Todd Hunter, who had just pulled a cigarette from his platinum case, quickly put it back. Grimes continued. "Gentlemen, responsibility for what happened rests entirely with me. I understood that reducing the ship's mass while the Mansion navigation system was engaged could lead to unpredictable consequences, which is apparently what happened. But I was forced to engage the engines, and now we don't know where we are." Sonya interrupted him. "Don't be stupid, John. If you hadn't fired the engines, it's not hard to imagine what would have awaited us, and the crew of the other ship. It would have been a collision, and not a minor one." "She's right," someone said quietly, and someone else suggested a vote of confidence in the captain. Grims had nothing against democracy, but now was clearly not the time to resolve issues democratically. A dictatorship should reign in spaceflight, and even more so in a situation like this. Besides, he didn't like Sonya calling him by his first name in front of the entire crew, so he responded coldly. "I appreciate your faith in me, but I don't believe we'll achieve results through a vote. As the ship's commander, I'm solely responsible for this expedition." He allowed himself to smile slightly. "But I'm not omniscient, and I'd be happy to hear all your thoughts on the current situation, and any suggestions on how we can get out of this mess." Swinton, sitting in the front row with the other officers, suddenly burst into laughter, but it wasn't hysterical. Grimes looked at him from under his thick eyebrows and asked coldly, "What's the matter, Swinton?" "Excuse me, sir, but this is very amusing. During the session, Miss Schmidt played her ancient instrument on the black and white keys, and you, at your console, decided to play in the cracks between the keys." "What do you mean by this?" "We're right in the middle of such a gap. We jumped from one universe to another, but we couldn't do it. We ended up in a gap between two universes." "A very witty comparison, Swinton. Very witty. We really have fallen into the abyss between neighboring universes. The whole question now is how to get out of here." "Perhaps Commander Calhoun can be of some assistance," Renfrew said. "During the session, we did make contact with something." Karen protested. No, you haven't experienced this, when something alien is sitting in your body and brain. But I have, and I don't want it anymore." To everyone's surprise, Calhoun didn't show much enthusiasm at these words. He said cautiously, "The one, with whom we spoke did us a disservice. If we had managed to establish contact with one of the master spirits, everything would have been different. But we couldn't. And if we contact him again, we'll only expose ourselves to ridicule." There was a painful silence. "Who else wants to speak?" Grims interrupted. The patrol service lieutenant stood up again. "Allow me, sir. I believe that if the mansion system got us here, it will also get us out. The fact that my system was also activated at that moment is also significant. Therefore, it can be assumed that the mass ejection at the precise moment the two devices were in operation led to our tragic consequences. As you know, experiments were conducted with both systems while they were being transported through time. You've no doubt heard of Furpose and his crazy invention, which he tested on Wenceslas, the moon of Corinthia. Well, I think I know what we need to do. But first, I need to work out my idea theoretically, and for that, I need the help of the engineers of the mansion system, and anyone else who's ever worked with mathematical calculations." "What exactly is your idea?" "Just this, sir. Repeat in full the conditions we were in when, in Commander Swinton's words, we fell into the crevasse, but with one difference." "Which one?" "The mansion system must be launched in reverse." "That's impossible," Calhoun said indifferently. "It is possible, Commander, but it will require significant changes to be made." "We can try," Swinton said.
Yes, Grims agreed. We can. The most important thing here is not to take any action without thoroughly studying the theory. Needless to say, time reverser could age us by several years in a matter of seconds. Another unpleasant prospect is that we could be thrown into the distant future, which could prove extremely inhospitable. A future in which the last of our suns goes out and all life dies. Or a future in which our world is conquered by one of the non-human civilizations, Shar, for example, or Darshan. Of course, we maintain diplomatic relations with them, but they dislike us just as much as we dislike them. "Mr. Renfrew once received a master's degree in multidimensional physics," said Sonya. "And I, Commander Verrill, once earned the Master of Astronautical Sciences degree. And I've seen more than once what happens when the mansion system gets out of control. I've been in similar accidents myself, and I've developed a deep respect for this thing." "But we have no time to lose," Renfrew said. "Why do you think so, Lieutenant? What is time in this hellish realm? Yes, there is biological time, of course, but when it comes to water, air, and food, our ship is completely self-sufficient. It's a shame, of course, that our biotechnologists didn't plant a cigarette tree in our garden, but we won't suffer from any shortages in other respects, and we could try our hand at, well, say, brewing beer." "So I can start theoretical calculations?" "Certainly." Renfrew began to reason with himself. "Let's start with the fact that all 3 executive officers are qualified navigators. Why shouldn't the third handle the calculations while 2 are on watch?" "There's a good reason why he won't," Swinton noted. "Really? Oh, right. I forgot that you, although a reserve officer, are actually a civilian. So why not? Perhaps you're afraid your compensation won't be sufficient for such work, or something like that?" Swinton flushed, but replied calmly, "As long as we serve on a Navy ship, we can't be civilians.
and I believe an officer should be vigilant and always alert, not immersed in endless calculations on an onboard computer. But we're in absolute emptiness, Renfrew growled. Yes, but we fell into a crevasse, Grims concluded, and that, as we know, only happens to unnecessary things. Chapter 11. The Seeker, a tiny shell of life and light, hung suspended in absolute nothingness. The electronic radio receiver was completely useless. Mayhew, the psionic radio officer, spent long hours in his cockpit waiting for any signal. He even resorted to drugs to somehow increase his brain's sensitivity, but not a single signal, even the faintest, lingered. Meanwhile, the work was slowly progressing. The computers worked day and night running the necessary calculations, which required a huge number, using specialized programs. The officers were no longer surprised when, after a dozen hours of work, the computer would display the message, "Additional data required," on the screen, and everything would have to start over. Grims, despite himself, tried to stay out of the work, but he knew he could intervene at any moment if necessary. Sonya, too, didn't interfere with the calculations, and he was grateful that she often kept him company. Grims was forced to focus more on administrative work. Personality clashes were beginning to emerge within the crew. Hidden hostility began to surface between members of various units and services. Grims understood well that even if nothing happened on this score, other concerns would remain. They could be compared to passengers shipwrecked on a distant, uncharted planet. There were 30 of them, 8 patrol service officers and 22 officers of the Frontier Military Space Fleet. Of the 30, 8 were women. As they flew, moving forward and busy with their own affairs, the issue of gender relations didn't arise. As long as their hands and heads were occupied with mathematical calculations and redesigning the Mansion system, this problem wouldn't arise. But if their attempt to escape failed and the ship was doomed to an eternity in the absolute void, then they should be prepared for any trouble. After all, this wasn't a flying monastery. We'd have to face that problem, Grims said worriedly as he and Sonya carefully sampled Todd Hunter's experimental batch of beer. She replied, "I was always prepared for this, John. Such an imbalance of men and women never leads to anything good. Of course, you can be sure of 1 or 2 girls, like Lieutenant Patsy Kent in my service. But even if she doesn't resort to polyandry, there's no guarantee her suitors won't fight. We can take some steps to prevent things from escalating into arguments. That's one of a commander's duties, after all. It looks like we'll have to come up with a working system of polyandry to make everyone happy. But don't include me in that system," she said sharply. "Many think I've strayed far from moral standards, but I have my own morals, which suit me. If this ship of civilization is destined to descend to the level of a primitive being, then I will belong to only one man, the tribal chieftain or elder." Grims looked at her with respect. She sat comfortably and gracefully in a deep armchair, her uniform shorts revealing her long, slender legs, and beneath her carefully buttoned, form-fitting shirt, her beautiful breasts were visible. The elder of the tribe, he thought, doesn't have to be that old. After all, I'm not that old either. And Grimm said out loud, "The elder's wife is, of course, an honorable role. But if I am the leader of my tribe, then you will undoubtedly be the leader of yours." "You flatter me, John. In any case, it's just talk. Maybe my guys can work it out with your Mr. Renfrew." "Hardly, because of the girls," he muttered, more to himself. "I hope that this is not the only reason for your words regarding the tribal leader." She laughed and asked cautiously, "Do you really think you're the only one?" "But I know why you took part in the expedition. There were only 2 people in your life, and you lost both. But you hoped to regain what you had lost." "And perhaps I already have. We've been together inside this flying tin can for quite some time now. I've watched you, John, and I know how your subordinates treat you. I've seen how you react to the unexpected or danger. Everyone respects you, including my own people, and including me." Respect alone is not enough, he answered sadly. But it will help us, especially if you feel other feelings for the person besides respect. And also, if you look at me as a woman and not as an officer of the Federation Patrol Service. This is all rather unexpected, he said, smiling. Really? Okay. I don't think we'll make things too difficult for ourselves. We might never return to our universe or to any other. We could all die if one of our guys pulls some funny stunt. Okay, let's not talk about sad things. Just imagine hanging in the void forever, completely self-sufficient inside our ship. You know about cases where old rocket ships have been found containing the descendants of those thought lost centuries ago. Who knows what fate awaits us? You are the leader of your tribe, and I am the leader of mine. Let's consider that we have entered into a political union. How romantic, he said. We're too old for that kind of romance, John.
Nothing of the sort. He reached out to her, and she made no attempt to escape. He reached out, kissed her, and was surprised by this long-forgotten sensation. Kissing a woman's lips, feeling their warmth and responsive longing. How long had it been since he last did that? Too long, he thought. How long had it been since he last felt the rush of passion, accompanied by the loud beating of two hearts? And how long had it been since he touched a woman's smooth skin, feeling her warmth with his hands? Too long. It's been too long, she said quietly, and they merged again in a long kiss. And behind the cabin there was a ship, and behind the ship there was nothing. The cabin was warm and bright, so bright that the light seemed unbearable, and it began to fade, slowly, slowly, to a pleasant twilight. The cabin was warm and cozy, and the feeling of calm and security came over them, whatever that might be in their situation. Grims remembered the medium's words that had been haunting him. In the night and emptiness, you search and fall. Both he and Sonya searched and found. They searched and found, but was it what they were looking for? She was looking for a lover, and he? Adventure? Knowledge? All the most precious knowledge was now in his hands. He knew this feeling would fade, but it would fade only to appear again. Sonya said something quietly. What, dear? She repeated, John, now you, as an honest man. Of course, he replied. Now the Federation's taxpayers will probably go broke on wedding gifts. She pinched his ear, and a struggle began between them that could only end one way. They'd already made considerable progress when a siren suddenly sounded. Grims jumped to his feet, buttoning his trousers as he went, and rushed toward the control room. What the hell, he thought as he ran. The siren continued to ring the letter A, just like when the ship was spotted in the alternate universe. Grimes, whose cabin was near the control room, arrived there a few seconds later. Third Mate Larsen and Junior Lieutenant Patsy Kent of the Patrol Service were already there. Larsen blushed and said hurriedly, Miss Kent needed a computer, sir, for calculations. I don't care. Why the anxiety? Larsen turned to the pitch-black screen of the mass proximity indicator. I don't know, sir, but there's something there. Something right ahead. Grimes stared at the screen and indeed spotted a dimly glowing dot near the edge. He punched in the distance code. The screen displayed 12,500 miles. It seemed they really had a decent device installed. It could have been a planet, an asteroid, or even an extinct sun. Or perhaps another ship. 12,500 miles, and their initial velocity before they fell here was 7 miles per second. But how could they measure speed where there is, or at least there was, nothing? There was still plenty of time to calculate the speed of their approach. The rest of the officers were already crowded in the wheelhouse. Swinton, Second Mate Jones, Renfrew, and Sonya. Damn it, why am I here? Grims thought, catching a whiff of her faint, disturbing scent. And he answered himself, Don't bother, Commander. You're no longer the rosy-cheeked youth who fell into mental turmoil when duty interfered with your love affairs. Your orders, sir? Swinton asked politely but impatiently.
The spot on the screen had already noticeably grown larger. "Are the laser cannons and missiles ready?" "Yes, sir." "Excellent. Mr. Jones, calculate the closing speed and the exact time of contact with the object. Mr. Renfrew, try to use the Carlotti system for its intended purpose and establish radio contact. Mr. Larson, quickly go to Mr. Mayhew and wake him. Tell him that some object has been detected, a ship or a planet, and I want to know if there is or was anyone alive there." And then, turning to Swinton, "I need to step out for a few seconds. If anything happens, try to find me." Grims went down to the bathroom below his cabin and quickly began to clean himself up. If they were about to encounter an extraterrestrial civilization, he wanted to look as a leader of the human race would when confronted by the unknown. Returning to the control room, he listened to the officer's report. Their ship was approaching the object at 12 miles per second, or perhaps the object was approaching them at that speed while they were stationary. Radar showed it was a small metal structure. Radio contact was impossible, neither regular nor psionic. So, was this a dead ship, transported here from its universe? And its crew or descendants perished hundreds of years ago, unable to sustain life in the confined space? Or was it the deceptive silence that concealed warlike creatures, waiting for their ship to get close enough to open fire? The commander walked to the phone and dialed Mayhew's number. "Mr. Mayhew, we're closing in on the object. Can you hear anything?" "No, sir." "It looks like a ship. Is it safe to assume the captain gave the order to maintain absolute silence?" "Every brain emits signals, sir. Only trained telepaths can maintain a stable connection. But we inevitably hear fragments of meaningless phrases, words, mathematical formulas." "So you think there is nothing living on board?" "I'm sure of it, sir." "I hope you're right." He turned to Swinton. "Take control, Commander. Reduce speed and bring the ship to a stop 1 mile from the target." "Yes, sir."
Swinton, having settled into the senior pilot's seat, began to give orders clearly and confidently. Grims watched his first officer closely, his youth clearly at odds with the responsibility of the position he occupied. The whine of spinning gyroscopes could be heard. Everyone hurried to their seats before the deceleration began. The jet engines kicked in. Sitting in his shaking chair, Grims experienced a strange sensation, unable to see the stars through the porthole. The engines stopped. The object was now approaching from the stern. A few more short corrective thrusts, and everything froze. Swinton reported, "Object abeam, sir. Speed reduced. Range 1.05 miles. Grims turned his chair toward the porthole. There was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. Within a few seconds, the searchlight found the object. It was a ship, but not the kind anyone in the cockpit was accustomed to seeing. The long, elongated hull seemed to be divided lengthwise into 2 halves. On one side was what looked like a cluster of control instruments. Grims, monopolizing the only powerful binoculars, carefully examined the strange structure. He made out what looked like fins and 2 propellers, like an airplane's, as if the ship were also designed for atmospheric flight. But the tail was too small, and the propeller too crudely made to fly in the atmosphere. There were also 2 tall poles, jutting out like masts from the flat surface at either end of the ship. Why? To navigate through the void using sails? It was incomprehensible. Between the masts were visible some structures, more like residential buildings with balconies. And right in the middle of these white-painted structures was another mast. But it was too thick and short. It was also painted white, but with a black top and a blue design on the side. After studying the design, Grims concluded it depicted some kind of hook or anchor. He handed over the binoculars to Sonya. After she had studied this strange phenomenon for a long time, he asked, "Well, Commander Verrill, what do you think about this? It could be a spaceship, but with such holes, it can hardly be called airtight."
Yes, but all the openings are on one side, on the one where all those superstructures are, as if one half is the ship and the other is something else. After all, sir, Swinton interjected, a ship doesn't necessarily have to be symmetrical on both sides. As long as it's outside the atmosphere, it can be any shape you like. You're right about that, Swinton. But if this thing is only meant for space travel, what are those propellers for? Aerodynamically, it's unlikely to be able to fly in the atmosphere, but it's clearly designed for flight nonetheless. Really for flying? Sonya doubted. Such heavy, crude propellers. And then, where is their planet? Swinton asked. If we're going to get to that point, let's ask ourselves, where is our planet? Grims replied. Who knows what strange circumstances could have brought this thing here? But seriously, our planet is probably a bit far from here. Are you sure? Renfro asked. What does distance mean where we are? Well, maybe our Earth really is somewhere very close. What do you mean, John? I don't know yet. It's too fantastical. He turned to the senior lieutenant. You remain in charge here, Swinton. We need to take a closer look at the ship. Chapter 13. The four of them huddled in the cramped spacewalk chamber. Grimes, Sonya, Jones, and Dr. Todhunter. They were soon joined by Calhoun and McHenry, both festooned with so many hammers, pliers, and all manner of tools and instruments that they wouldn't have been able to move in even the slightest gravity field. Naturally, they all carried jetpacks for space travel and, at Sonya's insistence, weapons. Grimes carried his favorite antique revolver. The others carried lightweight laser pistols. To top it all off, the surgeon had brought several electronic video and still cameras. Once everyone had donned their helmets and the ship's hatch was sealed, Grimes radioed Swinton to evacuate the chamber. The pressure gauge needle began to creep downward and finally settled at 0. Then the exit hatch opened. A strange ship hung directly in front of them. Against the absolute blackness, a bright spotlight highlighted every detail. It was painted in blindingly bright colors: red, pink, yellow details, the white superstructure. All of it seemed to glow and shimmer against the black void. The design was ostentatious and out of place, although from the perspective of any local inhabitants, if there were any, the seeker probably looked no better. Grimes thought about this as he cautiously climbed through the hatch. Pushing off from the ship, he briefly fired his rocket engine and calmly covered the 1-mile gap separating the ships. Flying close, he turned, slowed, and gently hit the hull, his boots immediately clinging to it. The bright red surface turned out to be steel. Most likely, he thought, whoever built this ship wasn't familiar with aluminum or plastic materials. The rest of the crew followed him to the surface. Walking on the curved surface required some skill. One false step or too strong a push, and someone would be stuck, unable to reach the smooth hull with their magnetic boots. With difficulty, they moved toward the wide red stripe on the side. Near it, Todhunter suddenly sank down onto his magnetic knee pads and began examining something. Everyone surrounded him. How strange, he said. They look like some kind of growths from a living organism. Now, of course, they're dead. That's exactly what I thought, Grims replied. What exactly, sir? If we ever return to Port Forlorn, come see me, Doctor. I'll lend you some books from my library. I remember an article by a talented young journalist from the planet Lornargus. He was writing about this very thing, and the article was called From Primitive Canoe to Interstellar Ship. I don't understand, sir. I don't understand much of it either, but these, as you call them, growths, have spent a long time here. They approached one end of the ship, following the red stripe. The stripe extended over a sharp ridge that split the hull in two, extending to the other side. The entire hull beyond the stripe was painted black. Near the ridge, above the stripe, a strange blue mark was visible, a circle bisected by a line, with the letter L on one side and R on the other. Along the ridge was a small blue stripe, divided by horizontal lines like a ruler. Next to each line were letter markings: TF, T, S, W, W and A. So this is one of our world's ships, Sonya said.
Of course, this could be signs of an extraterrestrial civilization, but I don't think so.
You're absolutely right, Grimes replied. The L and R stand for Lloyd's Register. The rest stand for the vessel's draft in various waters at different times of the year. This is a terrestrial seagoing vessel. But what does this mean? And how do you know this? I know because I was fascinated by the history of Earth's navigation. I should have recognized it at first glance, but the absurdity of the situation confused me. But perhaps our presence here is just as absurd. We have a better chance of survival, even if we never get out of here. Grimes then headed to the edge of the hull, where white handrails were visible. Holding onto the railing, he swung over the edge and stood on the deck, just as people had once walked here. Before him was a deck superstructure with wooden doors framed by a yellow brass band. The spotlight cast sharp shadows here.
Grimes switched on the lamp on his helmet.
Walking on the wooden deck was impossible, so Grimes, taking aim, pushed off from the railing and after flying a few meters, grabbed the handle. There was a corridor with open and closed doors on either side. Grimes waited for the others to arrive, then, holding onto the railing, headed for the first half-open door. It swung open easily. Inside the cabin was a chest of drawers, 2 easy chairs, and 2 bunks stacked against the wall, one above the other. The light from the flashlight reflected brightly off the metal fittings and gleamed dully on the polished wood. Grimes froze in front of the top bunk. Above it, tangled in white sheets, hung 2 bodies, one male, one female. The commander had encountered death before, but never before had people seemed so defenseless in its face. The mummified bodies had withered away over centuries of being held in this empty space, though not to the point of skin-tight skeletons.
Todd Hunter's voice came through the headphones.
May I film them, sir? Of course, Doctor. They won't mind either. How much time has passed, thought Grimes, since you thought and objected. But what happened to you? Did you die from the sudden cold, or when the air rushed out of the cabin in one fell swoop? Turning around, he saw Sonya's pale face behind the spacesuit helmet. How grateful we should be to be alive, he thought. How lucky we are after all. And then he said out loud, We'll find out a little by rummaging through other cabins. Where then? Calhoun asked in a low voice. In the control room. On ships like this, it used to be called the helmsman's room. Pushing off the handrails, they all followed him along the gangways and corridors. Every now and then, they encountered bodies similar to those in the first cabin. Finally, passing through a large hall where the light from lanterns shimmered brightly in the crystal chandelier, they emerged onto the deck again.
Lights hung on both sides of the ship. From here, the lights of the Seeker resembled a large star surrounded by nebulae in the dark sky. Using handrails and railings, they reached the captain's bridge. In the center of the wheelhouse, in front of the wide windows, next to a large mariner's compass on a stand, sat the steering wheel. Grasping its polished handles stood the deckhand, dressed in full uniform, sailor's cap, white collar, and black short boots. His face was frozen in intense attention, his eyes fixed on the compass, the needle of which hadn't moved a degree in half a millennium. Opposite the wheel was a door leading to another room, where 2 more men in white uniforms were hunched over a table. Grimes had no trouble discerning their ranks. "My apologies, Captain," he muttered, carefully pushing aside the tall, thin body of a bearded man with 4 gold stripes on his sleeve. Then he glanced at the map spread out on the table. Exactly what I thought. The ghost of South Africa. "What is it, sir?" Calhoun asked. "It's on Earth. It looks like the tragedy occurred at the beginning of the 20th century." Sonya read the entry in the open ship's log. The watchman reported thunder and unusually bright lightning. He also recalled the strange phosphorescence in the ocean. "But who were they?" Todd Hunter asked, "and how did they get here?" "I can only answer the first question," Grimes said,
pointing to the inscription at the top of the page of the ship's log. Waratah, Durban, Liverpool. Chapter 14. In the same room, several large glass frames hung on the walls, and in one of them, someone discovered the detailed plan of a ship. Everyone began to study it with interest. McHenry suddenly said, "I would like to take a look at their engine room." "I can already tell you how their engines work," Grimes replied. "A steam boiler, pistons, connecting rods, a coal-fired furnace."
If I'm not mistaken, I read that the ship called in Durban for coal on the way back from Australia.
"But I'd like to see what it looked like, sir," McHenry said, tracing a path along the plan to the engine room with his finger. "You need to go like this, through the boiler room, and from there straight to the engine room." "Okay, go ahead," said Grims, "but not alone." "I'll go with him," Calhoun said. At this point, Jones announced that he wanted to examine the holds, and Todhunter needed to take a few more photographs. Grims and Sonya stepped out the wheelhouse door and watched as two engineers, the second mate, and the doctor descended the ladder, flew over the deck, and one after another disappeared into the darkness beyond the open door. Sonya asked, "John, but how can you explain all this?" "That's the thing, I just can't. And if I could, it would help unlock other mysteries."
As you know, I was fascinated by the history of navigation and even held a position of authority in certain circles of scholars studying these matters. You know, even in this ancient 20th century, it was impossible to forget the complete disappearance of a ship. Back then, there were already fairly reliable methods of navigating by the sun and stars. Sound echo sounders, and the birth of radio communication dates back to that time. But ships still disappeared, leaving no trace. Take the Waratah, for example. It was a new ship, built for cargo and passenger service between England and Australia. On this voyage, it was carrying frozen meat, some other cargo, and passengers from Australia to Liverpool. It was scheduled to call in Durban to replenish its coal supplies. One of the peculiarities of this voyage was that many passengers, after vivid warning dreams, cancelled their tickets. Be that as it may, the ship arrived in Durban, took on coal, and set out to sea, exchanging a light signal with another ship heading for port. It was never seen again. Of course, many ships have sunk before and since, many with their entire crew on board. So the Waratah's disappearance was explained by the fact that it was extremely unstable afloat, caught in a storm, capsized, and sank within seconds. But this wasn't in the middle of the ocean, but in relatively shallow water and on a busy shipping lane. Not a single body or object from that ship was ever recovered. He pointed to a buoy on the deck, painted orange and white, with the words Waratah, Liverpool, clearly written on its side. Even if it had truly sunk within seconds, something would have remained on the surface, something with the ship's name on it. Thus, the Waratah joined the list of ancient mysteries of the sea, and then of space. You've probably heard of the Mary Celeste, which still haunts some experts. She was found drifting at sea, perfectly intact, with not a soul on board. There was also the Anglo-Australian, the Cyclops. Well, now we know what happened. But how and why? As an intelligence officer, I'd like to look into this matter, Sonya said. Ships disappear at sea, spacecraft and aircraft, and all the unexplained disappearances of people, like in your case with the Mary Celeste. We have ships disappearing too, like the Delta Eridani 2 years ago. Space is endless, and when various interstellar navigation systems are used, it becomes simply immense. When a ship goes missing, any search is completely futile. And how often, on some remote planet, do entire crews fall victim to a previously unknown life form? Entire ships vanish, leaving not the slightest trace. But something is still found. Naturally, a large unit within our patrol service is dedicated to searching for missing persons. They return to the chart room. Grimes, glancing at the captain and the officer of the watch, bent over the map, wished they would come back to life for a moment and learn from him what had happened to them. It wasn't impossible, really. Just remember their spiritualistic seance. But there was another method. In the early days of space travel, freezing crew members was used. But, firstly, emerging from suspended animation required specialized skills and equipment and could take several months. And secondly, often, very often, such temporary death became permanent for many. It was unlikely that Dr. Todhunter would have been capable of such an experiment. Grimes bent over the ship's log again. Its pages, dry and brittle, cracked at the touch. But all the writing was clearly visible. Thunder, lightning, and the unnaturally phosphorescent ocean. So what? Perhaps, Grimes reasoned, the thunderstorm had an effect, a monstrous coincidence at one point of electrical discharges, the Earth's magnetic storm and the resonant frequency of the ship's metal hull itself. Or perhaps, Sonya replied, there was some kind of catalyst on board the ship itself. Why did so many people dream before the voyage and refuse to sail? Perhaps these were the very people who involuntarily slipped into the alternate universe in their dreams. After all, our research confirms this possibility. In addition to reports of mysterious disappearances, we have evidence of equally mysterious reappearances. What exactly triggered our own disappearance from the familiar world? Mr. Renfrew's apparatus? Your anti-gravity system? Miss Karen Schmidt's spiritual powers? Or all of these together? You may have a point, Grimes agreed. I find this theory a bit far-fetched, but... By the ears, she protested. How long have we been hanging around in this void, and you have the nerve to accuse me of inventing pointless theories? But we're not in a complete void, he corrected her. It looks like there's some kind of magnetic field that attracts lost ships. And the dead people. Those unfortunate souls who tried to cross over from one universe to another, but failed. Like us, and like the Varata. It's good that we are able to maintain our own existence. Grimes interrupted the conversation as Lieutenant Swinton's call from the Seeker's control room rang through his earpiece. Grimes briefly recounted what they discovered. Then Swinton said, I don't want to rush you, sir, but Mr. Mayhew just told me he's receiving some signals. He can barely hear them, so either the signal is coming from far away, or it's very weak. So we're not alone here anymore, Grimes said. Switching to the internal channel, Grimes called the second mate, the doctor, and 2 engineers and ordered them to return. They tore themselves away from their investigations with great regret, having delved into the very depths of the ship. They emerged chattering excitedly about pistons, valves, furnaces, and boilers. They carried several large lumps of coal as souvenirs. Grimes would have gladly taken something more useful, a few books from the library or the grand piano that stood in the dining room. With this thought, he glanced at the bearded captain and sighed. It's not stealing, is it? I know you wouldn't mind giving a gift to a fellow sufferer. Excuse me, sir? John asked. No, nothing. Let's go home and see what's going on. Chapter 15. Barely emerging from the airlock, without changing clothes, merely removing his helmet, Grimes headed straight to the wheelhouse. Swinton greeted him with the words, Mayhew is hearing clear signals, sir. Excellent. Can he point you in the direction? He says not yet, but you know Mayhew. He won't say anything until you push him to the wall. Grimes glanced at the radar and mass proximity indicator screens. They were blank. The object must not have entered their coverage area yet. He walked up to the phone, picked up the receiver, but then changed his mind. I'd better go to Mayhew myself. If anything happens, call me there, Swinton. He nodded to Sonya, and she followed him out into the corridor. As always, Mayhew was impossible to reach. After pounding on the door with his fists and waiting a few minutes to be polite, Grimes slid the sliding door aside, and they entered the cabin. Mayhew sat in his chair with his back to them, hunched over, as if a powerful gravitational field were pulling his body toward his knees. He stared intently at a small transparent cylinder lying among the junk on his desk. Inside, in a nutrient solution, lay the finest of all biosignal amplifiers, the living brain of a dog. With this forlorn grey fragment of living matter, Mayhew was able to maintain contact with the entire galaxy. Turning around, he looked vaguely at those who had entered and finally said, Ah, it's you. What do I owe you, sir? I came to see how you're doing, Mayhew.
You can talk without looking up from your work, right? Of course, sir. The signal that you received, can you convey it in words? I guess not, sir, Mayhew decided after some thought. It's more like an emotion, an impression rather than a formalized message. Which one exactly? It's hard to say, sir. It's like a dream. Okay then, and who or what sent this message, that is, impression? A person, a humanoid, other intelligent beings? More likely there are several of them, or even many, but they are people.
Perhaps we're lucky, John, said Sonya, and in the minds of these people aboard the Verita, there's still a glimmer of life left in them. What are these dreams about, Mr. Mayhew? About cold, darkness, and loneliness? No, miss, on the contrary, these are happy dreams, about warmth, light, and about love. But could these also be people from the Verita? No, that's impossible. I've examined them thoroughly. They're as dead as the lamb carcasses in their freezers. How do you know about this? Grims asked in surprise. Sir, but it was necessary to maintain contact with your expedition. I heard what you were saying about the Verita's final voyage. So what? The only source of telepathic signals from this ship was you and your people. As for those other signals, I have the impression they are gradually getting closer to us. But damn, who are they approaching? Grims exploded. Forgive me, I am just talking to myself. But we don't even know our speed, or if we're moving at all. When we matched the Verita's speed, who can say what exactly happened, whether we stopped, or went in the opposite direction, or simply slowed down? I am not a navigator, sir, Mayhew said with a slight insult. None of us are navigators here anymore. But I interrupted you. Well, it's one of those pleasant dreams you see when you're half asleep. He paused. Wait a minute. I feel one of them better than the others. Let me try to isolate it now. So. A blue sky and high snow-white clouds against it. A river with banks covered with tall grass. And I'm sitting on the bank, among the trees, feeling the heat of the sun, and the wind carries the scent of freshly cut grass. He paused, and with a crooked grin, glanced at Grimes. I've never seen hay, sir, but you understand, this isn't my dream. So here it is, the smell of fresh hay, the birds singing in the trees, my pipe well lit, a fishing rod in my hands, and I'm watching the bait, a jig that I made myself. It slowly floats across the smooth surface of the water. I know that sooner or later the trout will surface and take the bait, but I'm in no hurry. I'm perfectly happy, and I have nowhere to rush. But suddenly a feeling of vague anxiety appears. I feel like I'm late for something, like it's time to wake up. Something terrible, irreparable is about to happen if I don't wake up. Strange, Grimes remarked. Have you been to Earth, Mayhew? No, sir. Do you know anything about baits? What is it, sir? You just mentioned it. Real fishermen always make their own jigs, out of feathers and wire. For them, fishing is just a pastime. God knows what other gadgets they come up with. But if the trout finds this bait edible, what's the point of worrying?
So, said Sonya, an Earth fisherman is approaching us, dreaming nostalgic dreams of his favorite pastime. Just like us, he's hanging out in this fissure between dimensions. But perhaps this dream reached us directly from Earth. After all, the Verita somehow got here. He's been drifting for quite some time, Grimes said. Please continue, Mr. Mayhew. He found himself in his happy dream again. He didn't catch anything, but he was happy. Can you highlight other dreams? I'll try, sir. But they're almost all about endlessly long, bright, sunny days. One man is swimming, turning and looking at a girl on the shore, his slender body cutting through the clear green water. And another woman, sitting on the green, silky grass, and her tan children playing nearby. But whoever they are, they're getting closer. Their dreams seem clearer and more vivid to me.
The air is cold and clear, and the snow crunches beneath my crampon boots.
I feel like I can almost reach the summit with my ice axe. It's so close, glittering brightly in the sun against the deep, dark blue sky. The wind is blowing snow off the summit,
making it look like it's waving a white flag. It's only snow, but I know the summit has surrendered. No one has ever summited it, but in a few hours I'll reach it and plant my own flag deep in the ice and rock. I've been told it's impossible to climb here without oxygen and safety hooks, but I'll do it anyway. To complete the picture, Sonya said half-jokingly, all that's missing is a dream about a quiet game of chess in a room filled with the smell of tobacco and liqueurs. Grims laughed. It seems they all prefer playing outdoors. Then the phone suddenly rang. Grims picked it up. Yes, I'm listening. Yes? Prepare everything for acceleration and begin preparations for the orbit change.
There was still nothing outside the porthole, and the old steamship had become a bright dot on the radar and mass indicator screens. But another dot appeared, its trajectory intersecting with that of the Seeker. Although the object was still thousands of miles from their ship, calculations showed that a dangerous approach was imminent. Grimes and his officers took their seats, and the acceleration pressed them back into their chairs. As before, Swinton masterfully piloted the ship. With quadrupled acceleration, the ship broke free of the danger zone, picked up speed, and aligned with the object. Another slight jolt of the engines, and everything came to a standstill. The fading roar of deactivated gyroscopes could be heard in the distance. Searchlights immediately turned on. Everyone once again crowded around the portholes, examining the structure hanging a mile away, and it seemed that only Grimes was unsurprised by the sight.
What they encountered this time consisted of 3 spheres, aligned along a single axis and connected by metal trusses. The first, small, was covered with antennas and portholes. The second, largest, apparently served as a living space, and finally the third, also small, had a whole battery of rocket nozzles protruding from it. There were no fairings or aerodynamic stabilizers. Swinton was the first to break the silence. What the hell is this? I suppose, Commander, you've studied the history of space travel. This is an ancient ship, a remnant from the days of the Great Dispersal. Humans were pushed out of the solar system to the stars, lacking any navigational aids that could have helped them shorten the decades of travel. Grims, enjoying the experience, decided to continue his lecture. As you can see, this ship isn't designed for takeoff from planetary surfaces or landing. It's a proper spaceship. It was built in orbit, and people reached it in small shuttlecraft, like those attached to the central sphere. The small forward sphere is, naturally, the control room. The middle one is used for living quarters, and the third, as you've probably guessed, is the rocket engine bay. Swinton said thoughtfully, most likely, the descendants of the first passengers and crew are there now, and they probably don't know how to use a radio. Judging by these antennas, their ship is filled with transceiver equipment. So either they didn't hear our signals, or they're unable to respond. They probably don't even know we're here. Grims laughed. You're not quite right, Swinton. Of course, they've come a long way. So long that whoever planned this voyage couldn't even imagine it. But I assure you, these are the same people who first boarded this ship. Excuse me, sir, but how did they survive? Surely centuries have passed. Grims continued. As I said, this ship is a relic of the Great Diffusion. It began when there wasn't enough room for people on the planets of the solar system. But it was known that many stars were surrounded by planets where life similar to ours was possible. And many of those who didn't want or couldn't adapt to life in overcrowded cities decided to undertake a risky journey. Using suspended animation technology, ships became capable of transporting enormous masses of people who were stored inside like frozen meat. Crew members would take turns waking up for relatively short periods of time to take up a few months' watch and then fall asleep again. Naturally, after spending many years in suspended animation, none of them aged. Finally, having entered the orbit of the chosen planet, people came to life and descended to their new place of residence. I wouldn't like that, sir. I would have too, but they didn't yet have interstellar navigation systems. And they didn't know, as we now know, that many ships simply disappeared into space. Some fell into stars or crashed into planets. Others were lost in the vastness of space. According to the Patrol Service, Sonya added,
13 ships did not reach their destination. This must have been the 12th, Grims noted. But how did he end up here? Sonya asked. We can find out, Swinton told her. We can try to find out, she corrected him. Grims carefully examined the sphere housing the control room through his binoculars. He thought he spotted a manually operated airlock hatch in one spot. This meant getting inside wouldn't be difficult. But the watchman should have noticed our lights, Swinton said. I'm afraid the watchman has no time for this, Grims answered calmly. Just like last time, Grimes, Sonya, Jones, Calhoun, McHenry, Todd Hunter were preparing to leave. This time, Grimes thought, the doctor and engineers wouldn't have to idle. The ship needed to be repaired and hundreds of people brought back from their death throes. And then, he thought, what next? But that question needed to be answered while already on board that vessel. Grims launched himself into flight through the space between two ships, the sleek, slender SAGA and the jumble of spheres and metal beams of the alien ship. He turned to look at the others. They were flying behind him, their silver suits gleaming in the floodlights, and every now and then one of them would adjust his trajectory, releasing a bright tongue of flame from his rocket pack. Looking ahead again, he saw the alien ship was very close, and before he could properly slow down, his helmet clumsily hit the hull. Magnetic knee pads snapped to the steel plating, preventing him from bouncing back. Carefully getting to his feet, he waited for the others and moved toward the airlock hatch. Along the way, he peered through the porthole, illuminating the interior with his lamp. He knew well what a control room on a ship of that era would look like. Deep seats for high G-forces, radar, monitors, instrument panels. At first glance, it was clear that all of this was long dead. Not a single light glowed on the panels. The light from the lantern glinted brightly on the surfaces. Looking closer, Grimes realized that everything inside was covered in ice and snow crystals. It felt colder inside than the absolute emptiness outside the ship. Grimes peered into the adjacent portholes and realized the control room was completely empty. But it only occupied a small portion of the first sphere. It should also have housed the pilot's quarters, food supplies, and water. He said to Sonya, "We might find someone in the living quarters, someone we can revive. And if not, there are hundreds of people sleeping in the middle of the ship." Grims approached the hatch he'd spotted through his binoculars. He couldn't manage it alone, so he waited for McHenry and Calhoun. Together, they moved the flywheel, gave it a few turns, and the heavy hatch slid open. The inner airlock door refused to budge so easily. Only the efforts of the entire crew gathered in the cramped chamber managed to move the locking lever. They opened the hatch wide enough to squeeze through. Entering the corridor, they saw that everything, walls, floor, ceiling, was covered in a thick layer of ice and snow, the remnants of the air that had once filled the room. From the corridor, they entered a storage area filled with fruit, which shone with fresh colors like the real thing, but crumbled at the slightest touch. When Grims touched the orange with his finger, it shattered into multicolored, glittering fragments, and he thought he heard the faintest ringing sound. But there was no sound here. The ship was completely silent. Even the walls and floor didn't tremble at his touch. Everything was absorbed by the layer of powdery snow. They came out into a circular corridor, along which there were many numbered doors. Grims pushed one of them, number 4. The door slid open with little resistance. This had once been a sleeping cabin, but now it had been converted into a morgue. A tall man lay on one bunk. In his right hand he clutched a dagger, the blade bearing a dark brown stain. On the other side of the cabin lay a woman, once undoubtedly beautiful. The cause of death was easy to determine. The woman had a wide wound on the left side of her chest, and the man's jugular vein had been severed. They peered into the next cabin. Its occupants appeared to be sleeping peacefully on a wide bunk, but next to them, an empty bottle hung motionless, its bright label depicting a skull and crossbones. In the third cabin, they encountered an equally tragic sight.
A complex tangle of wires entangled the bed and two bodies, connecting the transformer and the electrical outlet. Their deaths were sudden and painless. Wrapped in sheets and wires, they resembled a Laocoon sculpture. There was only one body in the fourth cabin, a woman's. Dressed in a clean black uniform, she was sitting upright in a chair, strapped in with belts. Only after a thorough examination was a revolver bullet mark discovered on her chest. "Cabin number 1, Calhoun said slowly. "Perhaps she's the captain?" "No," said Grimes. "This is also a cabin for 2. And besides, where are the weapons?" He carefully brushed the frost from her sleeve. A gold chevron on a white lining. She was the purser. They found the captain in a large cabin at the very end of the corridor. He too was dressed in a black uniform with gold buttons and stripes. He sat crookedly at the table, holding a pistol in his hand, the barrel near his slightly open mouth. His head was covered in frost, concealing a terrible wound on the back of his head. There were several sheets of paper in front of him. On one of them was written, "To whom it may concern. If, when, if it doesn't matter." It was a dark, not very funny humor, understandable only to that captain. Chapter 17. "Perhaps," Grimes read on the next page, "someone will stumble upon us someday. When we took off from Earth, there was talk of recent discoveries that could allow interstellar travel through certain gaps in space in a short period of time. Perhaps that's exactly the gap we found ourselves in. But I have no idea how we got here, or how we'll get out. If I'd known earlier, I would have banned the use of ethanol. But how could I have known that one of the containers would leak, and that the same fate awaited us all? After completing our watch, we could have woken Captain Mitchell and gone into suspended animation ourselves. But after discussing everything, we decided against it. I doubt we would have had pleasant dreams. Everyone else had happy dreams of their new life in the new place they were heading to, of the life that was predicted for them on Earth, whose reserves were rapidly depleting. But our dreams will be about cold, loneliness, and anxiety, about the black void into which we fall. But how did we get there? How? We were driven to this conclusion by the various objects we saw from time to time. What were the laws of motion in this netherworld? We didn't know. Perhaps they didn't exist at all. Nevertheless, something appeared out of nowhere and hovered around the control room for several hours. It turned out to be the body of a man in archaic clothing, a top hat, a frock coat, a tie. Mary Gallagher, whose hobby was history, said the clothing most likely dated back to the 19th century. Then an airplane appeared, a fragile construct of rods, guy wires, and fabric-covered wings. All of this must have arrived here hundreds of years ago, just like other objects, human bodies, a steamship, a strangely shaped spaceship on whose side one could discern inscriptions that did not resemble any terrestrial alphabet. I feel like my time has come. Everyone else is already dead. Sarah, who couldn't handle the gun herself, asked me to help her escape. But the others are already dead. The Browns were the luckiest. When I dealt the cards, they got the ace of spades, which meant the only remaining vial of ethanol. The others got a pistol. Nakamura chose his traditional weapon of death, though he used it unconventionally, and Gallagher demonstrated his engineering skills to the fullest. But now my time has come. When I finish this letter, I will turn off the equipment, and it will be my turn to use the pistol. That's our story, as it is. If some unfortunate soul like us reads it, perhaps it will be of some use. Fully loaded with passengers, equipment, and provisions, we left orbit on January 3rd, 2055. More detailed flight details are stored in the onboard flight recorder. Once the ship was placed on a flight trajectory towards Sirius 14, shifts began. For the first year, Senior Flight Captain Mitchell was on watch. As the most experienced pilot, he adjusted the initial trajectory.
The rest of the crew, after training, were placed in suspended animation. After Mitchell, it was Second Captain von Spiedel's turn, then Third Captain Clary's. It was a routine journey, like any other interstellar flight.
We then relieved Captain Clary and his crew. A watch changeover typically lasts 3 weeks. During this time, Pamela Brown, the medical officer, along with Clary's crew medic, Brian Kent, revived our crew members from suspended animation and prepared the other crew for a lethargic retreat. When Clary and his men left us, we assigned watch hours. Naturally, being on watch in the control room was a complete sinecure. Every hour, instrument readings were checked against calculated data. The course and acceleration matched to within a millionth of what had been calculated on powerful Earth-based computers. The last observation, made at hour 1200 of our watch, showed a distance from Earth of 1.43754 light-years and a constant velocity of 300 miles per second. That night naturally according to ship's time, all the off-duty officers gathered in the wardroom. They played bridge, as usual, while Nakamura and Mary Gallagher sat at the chessboard. Brown was on watch, and to keep him entertained, his wife went to the control room. All in all, it was a typically quiet evening. So the sudden blaring of the siren was like a bolt from the blue. I was the first to reach the control room. Brown didn't need to be told what had happened. It was obvious. Obviously isn't the right word. The fact is, there was nothing beyond the wide portholes. Absolutely nothing. We couldn't see the familiar constellations, nor the bright glow of the galaxy to starboard. There was absolute emptiness beyond the portholes. At first, it was suggested that we had entered a dense cloud of cosmic dust or gas, but this hypothesis was soon proven untenable. Brown said that the stars had been shining as usual until the very last moment. Furthermore, it's impossible to fly into a gas cloud at 300 miles per second without experiencing an instantaneous temperature spike in the ship's skin and deceleration. If this gas cluster was so dense that the brightest stars were obscured, then we would inevitably have burned up within seconds. Whoever you are, reader, I won't bore you with the story of all our attempts to escape and all the theories we put forward. According to Brown, the stars flared for a microsecond, then vanished the next. We tried to contact anyone by radio, but it was useless. There wasn't even a hint of noise. Absolute silence. We disassembled every receiver and transmitter on the ship, tested every unit, but it was no use. During the entire time, we couldn't pick up a single signal, not from Earth, not from other ships, not even interference from any star. But there were no stars themselves. After a few weeks, we began to come across various objects, real, tangible objects. One of the first discoveries was the enormous ocean liner Anglo-Australian. Brown and Nakamura took a shuttlecraft and examined it. Its funnel bore a black swan on a white background. Donning spacesuits, they were able to make more detailed observations. Naturally, the entire crew and passengers were dead. The ship's log contained no information indicating what had happened. As in our case, everything must have happened suddenly. We found numerous bodies in the space, some dressed in the clothes of bygone centuries, others simply naked. Ocean ships, airplanes, most indicated their terrestrial origin. But we also found a strange construction, a relatively small hull with enormous, strange sails suspended by guy wires. We couldn't determine who sailed these vessels. As soon as we pointed a searchlight at it, it accelerated and disappeared. Apparently, this interstellar vessel was powered by a beam of light, something we didn't know. We discovered some kind of airship with a bee-like crew. We tried to get out of here, but we had no starting point. Just like the others, we ended up in some kind of subspace. But how did this happen? How? We worked, then followed weeks of drinking and debauchery, then we returned to the tedious calculations and reasoning. Finally, fed up with it all, we decided to face the truth. We were forgotten here, and we lacked the knowledge and resources to escape this boundless void. At first, we considered waking the other crews, but then decided against it.
They were happy in their dreams, but we knew, would never be able to forget ourselves in a happy sleep. We knew too much, and at the same time so little, and our dreams would turn into nightmares, like torture. We had not a single glimmer of hope, and we came to the only way out. But you, whoever you are, you can help. The remaining crews are sleeping in their quarters in the northern part of the habitat. The awakening process is fully automated. Please convey my best wishes and apologies to Captain Mitchell. I hope he understands. John Carradine, 4th Captain. They left the control sphere and moved down a long cylindrical tunnel to the ship's living quarters. After passing through a hatch, they found themselves in a long corridor flanked by doors. At the end of the corridor, another hatch was visible. Each door had a nameplate. At the very first door, the long list of names was headed by Senior Captain Mitchell. Then came First Officer Alvarez, Second Officer Mainbridge, Third Officer Honeynall, Biotech Mitchell. Sonya remarked on this. Perhaps they were right to recruit a team of married couples. Grims pushed the door open, revealing transparent sarcophagi, 4 high to the right and left, with 8 more visible beyond, and then another. They looked, Grims thought, like glass coffins, and the people inside them like the dead. The only difference is that the dead don't dream. The 4 sarcophagi on the right held women, the 4 on the left held men. They all seemed to be in excellent shape. Mitchell, his name was on a plaque taped to the glass lid, was not young, but he was tall and well built. Even without his uniform, one could see the captain in him. And although he was near death, looking at him, it was clear that he, like no one else, would skillfully manage the 2 forces entrusted to him, the complex equipment and the restless, doubting people. Grimes looked at him, oblivious to the other sleepers, wishing Mitchell were the fisherman whose happy slumber had been interrupted by a feeling of unrest and anxiety. It could very well have been him. After centuries of sleep, his subconscious had disturbed him, reminding him that he bore the sole responsibility for the enormous ship and the people on it. Todd Hunter said, slightly confused, "Actually, there's nothing for me to do here. I've read the instructions. Everything here is automated." "Excellent, Doctor. You can press the button. I just want Captain Mitchell to wake up."
After all, it is his ship. "I already pressed the button," Todd Hunter grumbled. "So what? Nothing happened." McHenry laughed. "Of course not. After all, the dead captain we saw wrote in his message that he had turned off all the instruments." "I think," Grimm said, "the stasis system is maintained by a separate small reactor in the aft section. Carradine could have disabled it without leaving the control room, but we should go to the missile chamber and take a closer look. The batteries might have failed too." "It all depends on the reactor," McHenry added. "If the batteries really have failed, we'll have to drag them from our own ship's spares." They left Mitchell and his team and began making their way into the 3rd sphere, moving from floor to floor, past countless transparent sarcophagi. Jones paused for a moment near one, containing a beautiful girl with long golden hair, and muttered, "Sleeping Beauty." Before Grimes could respond, McHenry nudged Jones in the back and growled, "Come on, move! What a Prince Charming!" "Can we claim the role of Prince Charming?" Grimes whispered. "In any case, it's not up to us to decide. This is Mitchell's ship, and he should know what to do." They finally found an exit into a tunnel that connected to the 3rd sphere. The pumps and generators they found there were, as McHenry put it, antediluvian. "You're right about the antediluvian ones," Jones remarked. "This ship certainly resembles Noah's Ark." They reached the reactor chamber. McHenry took out his counter and turned it on. "It should work," he said. "If not for the spacesuits, they probably wouldn't have lasted long after leaving the reactor hall. Fortunately, the suits provided as reliable protection from radiation as they did from heat, cold, and vacuum." Cursing occasionally, McHenry set to work and, after a while, managed to restart the reactor. The room began to fill with steam. With the return of warmth, the air, frozen in a crust of ice on the walls, began to thaw and return to its original state.
McHenry barked orders. He was a rocket specialist, and he was in charge here. He gave orders to Calhoun and the second officer, and they carried them out. Some measurements needed to be taken, and valves opened. The frozen liquid gradually turned to steam and slowly filled the lines. McHenry monitored the pressure on the gauge and finally began to open a valve. Slowly and hesitantly, the first turbine turned one revolution, then another. It spun faster and faster until the entire room was filled with a fine tremor. McHenry, like a monkey armed with wrenches and wearing armor, jumped from place to place, tightening and loosening something. Finally, he solemnly clicked the switch, and the room filled with light. Everyone hurried back to the living quarters, to the sleeping Captain Mitchell and his crew. Todd Hunter was now in charge. He closed the hatch through which the crew had first entered, and then replaced another heavy hatch with thick gaskets and locks all around. He even had to use a McHenry hammer to do it. Grims watched him with anticipation and interest. It was clear the doctor knew what he was doing, and that he had studied the history of colonization flights, which always involved deep freezing the crew. He knew what it looked like from a medical perspective. Grims noted, "I understand the need to close all the doors, but why isn't anything happening? You pressed the defrost button quite a while ago, after all." Todd Hunter laughed. "That was the light switch, sir. But once we've completed the prep work, the entire process will proceed automatically. First, we need to isolate the remaining bodies. Each sarcophagus is equipped with its own refrigeration unit, but it's best to follow every single instruction." He fell silent and began to study the instructions posted on the wall further. Then, he turned on the monitor on the nearby control panel and pressed a few buttons. The heating elements began to activate, and the ice on the walls began to melt and liquefy, filling the enclosed space with fog. When it began to dissipate, the doctor said, "So far so good. You've probably noticed that the system here is much more complex than in the passenger compartments. The thing is, passengers are connected to a single shared wake-up system, and they can be woken up one at a time." Indeed, each of the crew members' sarcophagi was densely covered with wires and tubes. "Come on, Doctor," Sonya whispered. "There's no need to rush things like this, Commander." Thermostatic control is automatic, and resuscitation can't begin until the required temperature is reached inside and outside the sarcophagus. Suddenly, the sound of a compressor was heard, and the captain's body disappeared beneath clouds of gas filling the sarcophagus, so thick it seemed liquid. Then, just as unexpectedly, the gas dissipated, replaced by a clear, amber-colored liquid, which also completely enveloped the body. Simultaneously, the pneumatic cushion on which the captain lay began to vibrate, massaging his body. The amber liquid gradually became cloudy, then was replaced with a fresh supply. This process was repeated several times. Finally, the liquid went away. The transparent lid slowly opened. Captain Mitchell yawned, stretched, and opened his eyes. Smiling, he said in a pleasant baritone, "You know, I had funny dreams. I dreamed that someone was calling me, but they couldn't get through, and I slept for 200 or 300 years." Suddenly his eyes widened in surprise. He stared at the figures in spacesuits standing in front of him and blurted out, "Who are you?" Grims unfastened his helmet, gave it a quarter turn, and removed it. The cold, fresh air, filled with unfamiliar pungent odors, made him sneeze. "Bless you," Mitchell said in German. "Thank you, Captain. First of all, I apologize for coming aboard without an invitation. I hope you don't mind me using your air, as I really don't like talking through the membrane of a spacesuit if I don't have to." "Breathe in health," Mitchell said, sitting on the edge of his bed, looking a little confused and hostile. "But who the hell are you?" "My name is Grims, Commander Grims, Frontier Planet's Naval Space Fleet. Everyone else is my officer, and the lady is Commander Verrill of the Federation Patrol Service." "Border planets? The Federation?" He looked wildly at the other sarcophagi where his subordinates slept. "This must be a dream. A very bad dream." "I'm sorry, Captain. This isn't a dream. Your ship has been drifting for centuries, Sonya told him. While we were drifting here, Mitchell laughed sadly, those egg-headed engineers came up with a way to quickly travel between stars. We must have drifted to the very edge of the galaxy by now. He shrugged. Well, at last we've arrived somewhere. I'll wake my officers now and we'll get to work reviving the passengers. His face darkened. But what happened to the watch crew? Where's von Spidel, Clary, Carradine? Carradine is gone, Grimes said quietly, then continued softly. As are his crew. They're dead.
But he asked that you not forget him. Are you kidding me, Commander? What's your name? How do you know it's Carradine? And how can he send me greetings through you if he died hundreds of years ago? He left a letter, Captain. Before he died, he left a report of what happened. But what the hell happened? And how did he die? He shot himself, Grimm said seriously. But what happened? He didn't know that. But I was hoping you could help us. Help you? I don't understand, Commander. First you wake me up and tell me you've come to save us, and now you're asking for help. I'm terribly sorry, Captain, if you got the impression we've come to rescue you. We are not in a position to rescue anyone right now. We are just as much castaways as you are. How pleasant it is to wake up and hear such statements. Mitchell pushed off the edge of the sarcophagus with his hands and flew to the locker. Pulling open the door, he pulled out a black uniform with gold stripes and a lightweight spacesuit. A few minutes later, he was ready and holding the helmet in his hands. You and your hardware, he said to McHenry, who was hanging near the hatch with his set of tools. Open the door. Then he turned to Sonya and Grims. Put your helmets on. I need to go out. He leaned over the sarcophagus that was opposite his own and said quietly, I take you with me, darling, but you'd better get some more sleep. I won't wake you until this nightmare is over. Mitchell read the message Carradine had left, then went up to the control room. Luckily, the ship's log had been printed out, so he didn't have to fiddle with the computer to retrieve it from the depths of his memory. Mitchell looked out the window, where the blinding light of the Seeker's searchlight shone, and Grimes radioed Swinton to extinguish the searchlights and turn on the backlight. Mitchell gazed in amazement at the ship's sleek hull, so strikingly different from his own jumble of metal structures. His suit also contained a radio transmitter, but it used old-fashioned frequency modulation instead of the standard digital communications. He attempted to communicate with Grimes, pressing their helmets close together, but was unsuccessful. Grimes finally ordered McHenry to lock the control room and search for heating elements. When the frozen air warmed enough to breathe, they removed their helmets. I beg your pardon, sir, for my inhospitable behavior, Mitchell said sheepishly at first. I understand you completely, Captain. But, Captain, why couldn't Carradine call me? What would you have done if he had woken you up? You would probably have died, just like him. Now you have a chance. Perhaps, sir, perhaps. But you haven't told me how you ended up in this hell yourself. It's a long story, Grimes said thoughtfully. We have plenty of time, John, to tell all the stories we know, Sonya intervened. Okay, Grimes said. It's a long story, but you still need to know it. Perhaps you, with your fresh, unbiased mind, will catch some aspect, something that has escaped our attention. It must be hard, Mitchell replied. When I look at your ship and imagine the hundreds of years of work and research that went into its construction. Still, I'm lucky to have ended up in the future, although you can hardly call where we are now the future. Anyway, get started, sir. Grimes told him everything, trying to highlight the most important points, while also clarifying complex technical details. He asked those present to add to his account as needed. Mitchell listened attentively, occasionally asking questions. So, he said when the story was finished, we're not the only ones caught in this space-time abyss. Your expedition and ours, we discovered 2 sea liners, then an airplane, and an airship with bee-like creatures. Shara, Captain. We call their civilization the Shara, but they too now have interstellar ships. It's still strange, Commander. You think you got here thanks to your super sophisticated navigation systems, but we don't have them. And all those sea liners, and just the people Carradine saw. By the way, these SAGA, Commander, what are they like?
Roughly speaking, these are honeybees that have reached a high level of evolution. I see. But that means there's something in common between our civilizations. Otherwise, they would never have gotten here like we did. Intelligence, technological progress. You said they now have interstellar ships. But there must be something else. I know that, Calhoun said firmly. What exactly? Asked Grims. This, well, let's call it from the realm of psi-phenomena. But the SAGA are deeply materialistic and do not accept such things. I know, sir.
However, they may possess certain abilities. They needed them for survival before they began their evolutionary leap. For example, what we call dowsing. Dowsing? Yes, exactly. According to some studies, bees on Earth and in some other places where they have been introduced have the same ability to find nectar as dowsers find water or minerals in the ground. Frankly, this is the first time I've encountered such a theory. She's quite famous, though. Mitchell perked up. Dowsing, he whispered. There's definitely a connection. What kind? Sonya asked. The senior captain became thoughtful again. I don't know. Although, this ship, as you know, is one of a series of similar ones built for the purpose of colonizing other planets. I believe, Commander and Commander Verrill, that by now all discovered worlds have been sufficiently explored. But in our time, that wasn't the case. The ships flew into the unknown, relying solely on the astronauts' recommendations. We didn't know in advance which planet we'd land on. If one planet wasn't suitable for life, we flew on to the next. Typically, a small shuttle-type ship would descend to the planet's surface for reconnaissance. The scouts were supposed to find water, ore deposits, minerals, and flammable materials. Naturally, they used various instruments, but in many cases it was more efficient to send people with the gift of dowsing. I think I see where you're going with this, Captain, Sonya remarked. But dowsers don't make up the majority of the crew or passengers. Probably not, Commander Verrill, but... Calhoun interrupted him. Dowsing is much more widespread among people than is commonly believed. To a certain degree, a significant portion of people possess this gift. Shara does dowsing, we do it. So what? Grims said. Do you know where the dowsers are lying among the passengers? Calhoun asked Mitchell. Or perhaps I should say stacked.
Stacked, that's probably more accurate, Mitchell agreed. I don't know yet, but I can check the passenger list and the plan. I'm sure they can help, Calhoun said confidently, and turned to Grimes. Sir, I suggest you call Swinton and have him send Mayhew here as soon as possible. Who is this Mayhew? Mitchell asked. This is our psi radio officer, a professional telepath. Aha, so this idea has been developed. In my time, people were just starting to talk about it. And you think he'll be able to read the minds of sleeping dowsers? I hope so, Grimes replied. I'll ask Swinton to send one of our spacesuits here for you. It will make our conversations much easier. He put on his helmet, turned on the long-distance communication, and gave Swinton the necessary instructions. Chapter 20. Soon they saw Mayhew.
Along with one of the junior officers,
He emerged from the brightly lit airlock under the spotlights and flew through the void separating the ships. Jones went to meet them at the exit chamber. Fortunately, all the doors between the main compartments were equipped with airlocks, so they could move around without fear of escaping the warm air from the control room. Soon, all three emerged, and the cold visors of their helmets immediately fogged up. You called for me, sir? Mayhew asked, struggling to remove his helmet. What do you think? Grims asked sarcastically. But Mayhew had already turned to Captain Mitchell. Ah, so you are that fisherman. Yes, I remember your dream. You were sitting on the shore with the fishing rod and... Enough, Mayhew, now is not the time, Grimes interrupted sharply. We need to get down to business. Yes, sir, and I know what kind. Well, yes, of course. I hope you know.
Listen, Mayhew, does this kind of eavesdropping contradict the ethical standards you are taught?
Under the circumstances, no, sir. My job is to be aware of the situation when any expedition leaves the ship.
Okay then, we'll save time. So, Captain Mitchell, as soon as he dons the spacesuit you brought with you, will lead us to the compartment where the dowsers are located. It's entirely possible there's some connection between them and the ships ending up here. What did you call it, Captain? In this subspace. While Mitchell changed suits, Jones tinkered with the onboard computer. He finally got it up and running. Then Mitchell sat down at the monitor and, within minutes, found the information he needed. Level C, he muttered, looking at the printed page. Sector 8. Sarcophagi 18 through 23 inclusive. Having folded the piece of paper, he put on his helmet with Sonya's help, and they moved towards the exit.
Led by Mitchell, they quickly found Level C and, at its very edge, Sector 8. There were 6 dowsers. 2 are remarkable men and 4 women. One of them was subtly different from the others. The telepath stopped near the first sarcophagus, looking at the man lying beneath its transparent lid. His face became serious and focused. "This man," he said finally, "is dreaming about food. I see a table covered with a snow-white tablecloth, crystal glasses, glittering silver utensils. There are other people sitting at the table, but they are all unclear and blurred. For a dreamer, they are not the main thing. But then the waiter shows me a bottle of wine, and then fills my glass. The waiter is an elderly, stately man, with a ruddy face and grey curly sideburns. Smiling, he pours me a quarter of a glass. I taste it. It is a dry white wine, very tart. I nod my head in satisfaction. Another waiter serves me oysters on a silver plate, fresh bread, butter, sliced lemon. Not quite what we're looking for, Grims interrupted. Yes, of course. I was just starting to get the hang of it. I mean, it was the first time I'd seen an oyster. I mean me, not the one dreaming this. I'd like to try them. Well, it's too late now. Dreams are fleeting, and he's already thinking about something else. And he glared at the second man who was lying below the first. This man, he works in his dreams. He walks along the slope of the hill, across the springy turf. In his hands is a forked rod. I feel the roughness of the rod in my hands and its aliveness. The rod seems alive in my hands, sometimes pushing away, sometimes pulling toward the earth. Now the rod trembles, and I know that beneath my feet, deep underground, there is water. I walk on. I am in no hurry. Here are metals, and here is ore. No, said Grims. Does not it either. I beg you, sir, not to interrupt me in the middle, but to wait until the dream is over, even if these are not my dreams. Mayhew reluctantly moved to the next sarcophagus. It contained a tall, angular woman with wide, sharp cheekbones. Her skin was grayish, and it seemed to emanate a coldness even greater than the vacuum itself. Mayhew shuddered as he looked at her. His lips moved silently, and he stared at her for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, "She's dead. She's dead, but..." "But what?" the commander asked impatiently. "But... I feel... how can I say this? A memory." "A ghost," Calhoun suggested. "No, not a ghost. There are still memories of her last thoughts lingering in her mind, but I can't bring them back to life." She was left with a feeling, no, not a feeling, but a hint, of some powerful experience, so powerful that, in my opinion, she couldn't survive it. Todd Hunter objected. "But her death wasn't caused by any physical reason. That's impossible. Maybe we should try to revive her." He turned to Mitchell. "As far as I understand, Captain, we can't do that without waking the entire ship. There's no individual awakening system here." "Absolutely right. Would you mind if we use one of the empty sarcophagi in your compartment for this?" "Well, we're not supposed to do that, but we can use the empty sarcophagus in Carradine's compartment. I don't think he'll mind." "Wonderful. Check the other dowsers first, Mr. Mayhew," Grimes said. Mayhew complied. The 3 remaining women were alive, as much as anyone could be called alive in such a state, and they all dreamed of roughly the same things. Family life, husbands, houses, children.
The sarcophagus lid was opened, and the rectangular, transparent block of frozen gas containing the body slid out easily. Despite the weightlessness, it took some effort to pull it out of the cramped sarcophagus and into the passageway. Through corridors from level to level, they finally dragged it to the other end of the sphere, to the compartment housing the crews. In the fourth captain's quarters, all the sarcophagi were, naturally, empty. The woman's body was placed in the one that was easiest to reach. Then everyone entered the cabin, the hatch was sealed, the heating was turned on, and the resuscitation process began. When the frozen air thawed, the sarcophagus, as before, filled with a thick gas. Then the body was massaged and doused with jets of amber liquid. Gradually, the woman's face turned from grey to yellowish, and a slight flush appeared on her cheekbones. Her eyelids parted and one leg began to tremble. "She's not dead," Grimes muttered. "Dead," Mayhew countered. "It's a cramp. Just a cramp. And I don't like it at all." The sarcophagus lid lifted, and the woman slowly sat up. Her eyes were open, but there was not the slightest glimmer of consciousness in them. Drops of saliva flew from her slightly open mouth, accompanied by a loud, hoarse breath. "The blue sky," Mayhew whispered, "blindingly blue. Like a piece of cloth in huge hands, it tears. A crack creeps across the sky, and the roar of the tearing sky is more terrible than the most terrible thunder in the most terrible storm. The crack creeps and widens, and beyond it is blackness and emptiness, in which there is nothing. No, there is something there. From the emptiness appear figures in shining white robes, with enormous white wings that embrace the heavens. And now they raise golden trumpets to their lips, and a sound is heard, high and gentle. And golden, gentle sounds of music fly from the heavens, and crystal voices sing, and flaming swords punish the unrighteous, and that's all," Mayhew concluded. "Now she's completely dead. Deader than that." "So that's what she dreamed," Mitchell said, his voice barely audible and colorless. "That's what she dreamed, and she dreamed it with such force that she dragged the entire ship down with her into that hole in the sky. But did she do it? Could she have done it?" "Is there a better explanation?" Mayhew objected. "Is there even an explanation?" Grimm said wearily. Chapter 21. Of course, this was an extremely strange, hard-to-grasp hypothesis, but they simply had no other. The problem the Seeker's crew had been trying to solve with complex mathematical calculations and an analysis of the laws of physics, a problem they had so far failed to solve, either the calculations weren't complex enough or the laws of physics weren't fully understood, was explained here by a disruption of human parapsychological functions. The history of humanity and other living beings in the galaxy proved that dowsers searched and always found. And some of them, asleep or unconscious, searched beyond time and space. As a result, many of them fell into this abyss, dragging the entire hapless crew along with the ship they were on. "Commander," Mitchell said, "that's probably exactly how it happened. Our ship isn't like yours. We have an archaic, by your standards, metal box with a rocket engine. We don't have space-compressing navigation systems." "Perhaps that's true," Grimes agreed. He was ready to consider any possibility, any way to get both ships out of here, his own and Captain Mitchell's. He recalled everything he'd once read about the Great Dispersal and those primitive interstellar arcs. As on the biblical ark, passengers could only take part in the flight in pairs, a man and a woman. A sudden thought flashed through his mind. He turned to the SciComm officer. "Mr. Mayhew, can you enter someone's mind?" "What do you mean, sir?" "To influence a person. Our rules prohibit this, sir." "To hell with your rules. They apply to the galaxy, and we, as we know, aren't there. And as for our ship, I make the rules on it, just as Captain Mitchell does on this ship." "Can you penetrate another person's mind and influence them?" "Sometimes it works, sir. Into the brain of one of the sleepers on this ship." "It's much easier, sir." "Very well. Now, Captain Mitchell, I'll explain my idea. There are 5 dowsers on this ship, happily sleeping in their sarcophagi. Mr. Mayhew will enter the dreams of 4 of them. Mayhew is a terribly patriotic man and considers his planet Lorne to be the most heavenly place in the entire universe. Therefore, he will use all his telepathic talents to present Lorne in the best possible light to the sleeping dowsers. My idea is this. Each of them will dream of being alone, in darkness and emptiness, cold and afraid, which, however, is not so far from the truth. Each of them will hold in their hands their working tool, a dowsing rod, a forked twig, or a bent knitting needle, or whatever they use, basically whatever they prefer. And each will dream that the dowsing rod draws them, leading them to a joyfully shining planet in the starry sky. Mayhew will depict the planet in as much detail as possible, with all its seas and continents. We will help him with this, since we ourselves have seen our planet from space more than once. I can't guarantee it'll work, of course, but we have a chance. If it doesn't, none of us will be hurt. And if it does, you'd better fire up your engines before Mayhew gets to work, so we can reach a safe orbit. It sounds crazy, Commander, Mitchell said, but it's crazier than being outside of time and space. In any case, to operate the ship, I must first awaken my officers. Of course, Todd Hunter will help you with this. Mitchell thought about it. Sir, why do you only want to use 4 sleepers? Why not all 5? If this works, we'll be entitled to a certain reward, since it will be something like salvage. I know how the passenger lists for flights like yours were compiled. Men and women in equal numbers, husbands and wives. And I have a feeling that the husband of that religious fanatic who brought your ship here is also one of the dowsers. We need to check the list. Mitchell pulled a printout from his pocket. If this method works, muttered Sonya, it would be nice to have a dowser on our ship too. The mad woman, or religious fanatic, as you called her, Mitchell said, is Mrs. Caroline Jenkins. Her husband, John Jenkins, is indeed a member of the dowsing team. His position is listed here. He's the man who was thinking about food. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to wake my team. I hope I won't have to put them back to sleep after this experiment. After the crew woke up, they headed back to Level C, Sector 8. Grimes, Sonya, Mitchell, Todd Hunter, McHenry, and the medical officer from Mitchell's crew went with them. She was a serious woman, and after waking up and being briefed on the situation, she immediately began discussing medical issues with her colleague, Todd Hunter. And of course, Mayhew was with them. The first thing they had to do was disconnect and remove the sarcophagus containing the body of Mrs. Jenkins' husband. He was now dreaming, Mayhew said, of other carnal pleasures. At least, Grims muttered, he won't be too worried about losing his wife and object to moving to another ship. McHenry and Todd Hunter began hauling the huge, unwieldy sarcophagus from floor to floor toward the nearest airlock. Then they had to drive it to the Seeker, where engineers would connect it to the hibernation system. Mayhew approached the second man, the one who had been searching for water in his dreams. He spoke his suggestion aloud, his whisper echoing loudly in the headphones of those present. You are alone. You are forgotten by everyone. There is darkness around you. There is nothing around you. Nothing. Absolute emptiness. You are flying into nowhere, and in your hands is a dead rod. You are flying. But then the rod stirred, twitched slightly. You felt it shudder, very faintly. But it came to life. And in exactly 120 minutes, it will show you the direction. It will guide you confidently through the warmth, and you will finally see the light, a small golden star. It will grow larger, and now before you is a beautiful planet. You will see blue seas, green blooming continents, snow-capped poles. One half of the planet is bathed in sun. On the other, you will see the bright lights of cities in the darkness. You will see oceans and land, but not yet. Time must pass before the rod comes to life in your hands and leads you to the planet Lorne, A beautiful sunny planet. I hope they won't be too disappointed, Grims thought, when they see the real Lorne. But it's still better than hanging around here. Mayhew continued his speech for quite some time in the same vein, then moved on to the next dowser, and then to the remaining two, and when it was finally all over, there was barely half an hour left until the scheduled time for the hypnotic command to be activated. Grimes and everyone else headed back to the control room. Mitchell's officers had already restored her to full health. With the exception of Grimes, Sonya, and Mayhew, the rest of the Seeker's crew had long since returned to their ship. Grimes turned to Mitchell. "We're leaving you, Captain. If all goes as planned, we'll meet again soon in our world." Mitchell laughed. "I hope so, sir. But tell me, is Lorne really as beautiful a planet as Mr. Mayhew described it?" "You can make a small allowance for his patriotism, Captain. But you don't have to stay there," Sonya interjected. "Our service will be happy to relocate your entire ship to the planets you prefer. Federation taxpayers have deep pockets," Grims noted. "John, this is an old joke." "Maybe, Sonya, but that's how it is." The commander shook Mitchell's hand, then donned the gloves of his spacesuit, carefully fastening all the fastenings. After donning his helmet, he watched Sonya and Mayhew do the same. Then, accompanied by one of the officers, they descended to the exit airlock. Arriving on their ship, they waited impatiently for the airlock pressure to rise sufficiently to rush to the control room. Then they waited, glancing at the ship hanging outside the porthole, bathed in searchlights. They waited, watching the ship's chronometer, first the minute hand, and then their attention shifted to the second hand. Now it had passed the scheduled time and was counting down the first minute of delay. Grimes glanced impatiently at his wristwatch. Noticing this, Mayhew said calmly, "I'm watching them. They can already see the light in the distance, and the vine is already showing them the way." "I still don't see how it could work," Renfrew said quietly. "They got here without any of your tricks, Lieutenant," Calhoun replied. "That means they're capable of leaving without any time precession." When they looked out the window, there was nothing there anymore. "Damn," thought Grims, "the searchlights failed, but they have lights burning in their own cockpit." "The screens are blank," Swinton announced. "It worked," Mayhew whispered. "It worked." Chapter 22. If it had worked for Captain Mitchell's ship, it was bound to work for them too. The requisitioned dowser lay peacefully in his glass case, finishing another lustful dream. Mayhew, despite his fatigue, immediately decided to get to work. First, he attempted to introduce elements of doubt and anxiety into the sleeper's consciousness, and turn his thoughts away from the satiated comfort toward the cold and emptiness of the extra-dimensional rift between universes. But it was hard. Jenkins lived in his dreams, and lived only for his dreams. He was a man completely deprived of any carnal pleasures during his life on Earth. In the presence of his religious wife, he couldn't even afford a glass of cold beer or a piece of well-cooked meat. So he lived in his dreams. He loved his dreams, for they saved him from a hopeless life. But Mayhew persisted. His voice occasionally echoed throughout the engine room, where the sarcophagus was located in a secondary room, and it seemed as if his words were cooling the entire ship and plunging it into darkness. He persisted, and now the thin, poisonous snakes were stirring in the Garden of Delights. The steak grew tough, the knife dull, the wine tasted of cork, the cheese was unripened, and the soft bread was growing stale. The beer was lukewarm, and the sandwich had no mustard. The portions were either too large or too small. These were the little things that we encounter at every step in life, but they threw the sleeper off balance. Then there was a charming blonde who, smiling, revealed blackened, rotten teeth, and a foul odor emanated from her mouth. And the voluptuous brunette who, having undressed, revealed a body riddled with ulcers. And so on, in a similar spirit. Jenkins's dreams had certainly not been sublime, but they were also devoid of depravity. Now, thanks to Mayhew's efforts, they were losing all their appeal. Now, having escaped the embrace of the lustful witch, he stood staggering on the edge of a black, bottomless abyss, consumed by shame and fear, while the deities his wife worshipped leaned menacingly over him.
One more small effort, and he stumbled, clinging to the grass with his hands, sliding inexorably toward the abyss, slipping and falling into the cold and emptiness. He falls into cold and emptiness, into an abyss that has opened up beneath his feet, and this absolute emptiness is worse than hell, which his wife has repeatedly frightened him with. He falls into a cold, black void, and in his hands is his only friend, his last hope that can lead him back to the familiar world, and there is nowhere else to expect help except from this bent spoke in his hands, but it seems that it has died and is frozen forever. But then the silver spoke comes to life. It leads him somewhere, and he can already discern in the distance a dim yellowish star which flares up brighter and brighter and grows into a beautiful planet where beautiful women walk in green gardens and ripe, juicy fruits hang on the trees, and under them there are tables laden with delicacies. "But it's not Lorne," Grimes said quietly.
"It's not Lorne," Sonya echoed. "Lorne," Mayhew whispered loudly. "This planet is called Lorne. It is a beautiful open world." And the frame in your hands becomes rigid and, like a compass needle, is directed at this planet. You cross a black abyss. From the abyss of sleep, you will build a bridge into reality. You only need to follow the frame. It leads you, it drags you, it attracts you. "Where is she taking him?" Grimes interrupted. "Where? To Lorne, of course," Mayhew whispered. "He has extremely powerful dreams." Suddenly and sharply, a siren howled, and again, the letter A in Morse code. For the umpteenth time. Chapter 23. Beyond the porthole, the galaxy's starry splendor shone, and to the right, blocking out the entire sky, the surface of Lorne glittered. The familiar outlines of continents could be discerned through the breaks in the cloud cover.
Without warning,
Swinton fired the thrusters to bring the ship into a stable orbit, and everyone who hadn't yet taken their seats was thrown against the wall. A strangely familiar voice blared over the loudspeaker. "Unidentified ship, respond. Unidentified ship, respond immediately." Renfrew, at his control panel, adjusted the antennas so that he could receive, along with the sound, the image on the screen of the control room of the ship that was calling them. Grims glanced from his position at the radar and mass indicator screens, and on both, he saw a bright dot rapidly approaching the center. In a few minutes, the ships would be close enough for stable video communication. "Identify yourself," the loudspeaker continued to blare. Grims, taking the microphone, calmly said, "Seeker, auxiliary ship of the Frontier Planet's Naval Space Fleet. Identify yourself."
The voice on the speaker made a strange, indescribable sound, apparently expressing disbelief, and said,
"Seeker? The Federation Space Fleet? Never heard of it before. Are you drunk, or have you lost your minds?"
"No," Sonya whispered. "It can't be."
Looking at her, Grims was struck by the extraordinary pallor of her face. The transceiver's central screen finally came to life. Clearing the static, it depicted the control room of another ship. It was very different from their own, and in the pilot's seat sat a uniformed man, monitoring the radar. Grimes recognized him immediately. In that other universe, where they were born and raised, he had been the captain of the Polar Queen, and had crashed it during an ill-fated landing at Port Farwell. Grimes was the chairman of the investigative committee investigating the matter. It turned out that the captain's position was a cover for his main job. He, like Sonya, was an intelligence officer of the Patrol Service, and he and Sonya... The commander turned in his chair towards Sonya, and trying to put a note of polite regret into his voice, said to her, "Well, it looks like you've accomplished the mission's purpose. It was a pleasure meeting you." She replied, "My goal was achieved long ago. And John, believe me, I'm very pleased to have met you." "I've got their image," Renfrew said for some reason. but it looks like our signal hasn't reached them yet. Starfarer to an unidentified ship. Starfarer to an unidentified ship. Prepare to meet the inspection committee. I advise you to prepare for the meeting, Grimm said to Sonya, and thought, it's a shame, of course, that everything ended like this for us, before it even began. But you can't be selfish. You will meet him again. You still have a chance, he added. Starfarer to an unidentified ship. Any hostile action will entail dire consequences for you. Prepare to be inspected. Commander Swinton, Sonya's voice rang out unexpectedly clear.
Activate Mannhen's navigation system. Select compression level at will. Yes, sir, the first mate blushed. Excuse me, ma'am. Then he turned to Grimes. Your orders, sir? John, Sonya said anxiously, we have to get out of here. No. You wanted this. This is your chance, and you got it. She chuckled. A woman can change her mind. I need my own universe, where there is only you alone. She laughed, pointing at the screen. A girl in an officer's uniform appeared behind the ship's commander and leaned toward him, smiling. He said something kindly to her. Where you are alone, Sonya repeated, and where I am alone. Activate navigation system, Grimes ordered. Random compression. Yes, sir, Swinton responded readily, and along with the growing thin whine of the gyroscopes, the screen began to ripple and quickly went dark. The receiver went silent, and the galaxy outside the porthole slowly took on the familiar outline of a Klein bottle, covered with the multicolored traces of passing stars. Sir, Renfrew grumbled discontentedly, they could have helped us get back, and even if they couldn't, I still think we should stick to the ruse. It's your right to think as you see fit, Sonya replied with the harshness she could afford to her subordinates. But the commander and I make the decisions here. But this is supposed to be a scientific expedition, Renfrew continued. And there's no science involved. Just some dowsers, seances. You can't deny that we have some results, Calhoun remarked. Fortunately, yes. Grims, sitting at the table in the finely tidied-up mess hall, watched the squabble wearily. It was time to relax. The location they'd landed in had been chosen half by chance, half by rough calculations. After the accident with the Polar Queen, he'd questioned Maudsley, the real Maudsley, and hadn't formed a particularly high opinion of his flying skills. But even if this Maudsley had been far more capable, finding the ship in galactic space was as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. Gentlemen, he interrupted the argument, the purpose of our meeting is to find a way to return from this universe to our own space-time dimension. Does anyone have any suggestions? No one had any proposals. Our problem was, he continued, that although the dowsers helped us out of the pit, Mr. Mayhew was too prone to view his planet through rose-coloured glasses. Unfortunately, he alone is capable of influencing the dreams of our patient Jenkins. So, Jenkins, imagining Lorne to be more attractive than it actually is, led us to a world where the border planets are part of the Federation. Naturally, this entails a higher standard of living and some other advantages. But we, in our world, consider independence too high a price to pay for convenience. As for the reasons why we decided not to contact the inhabitants of this universe, I don't think any of us would like to meet another version of ourselves, with the same job, house, and wife. So, what do we have? We only have Jenkins, Calhoun said. Yes, we only have Jenkins. But how do we use him? But we also have your talent, said Sonya. My talent? Your premonitions. They have never deceived you. This is explained more by extrapolation of the past and present than by my talents. Having said this, he sat down in his seat, fastened his seatbelt, and began recalling the details of the entire flight. Soon, he no longer paid attention to the discussion unfolding around him. He recalled the first time they crossed the invisible boundaries and found themselves in the alternate universe, and that was before they fell into the chasm. He recalled that strange splitting, then the light impact. Or maybe... Mr. Mayhew, he called. What? Excuse me, yes, sir. What do you think about our ship? Well, it's a ship like any other.
And you don't overpraise him in your heart? Why this suddenly, sir? Okay then, please come with me to this dowser again. I want you to penetrate his dreams again, as you did before. I need you to plunge him into darkness once more, and for him to emerge with his frame from the void into light, life, and warmth. But you said that my vision of Lorne is too idealistic. That's true, but you lead him to the Seeker. To us, sir? To whom else? Cold, Mayhew whispered. Cold, darkness, and absolute emptiness. There's nothing here, nothing. There's nothing here except the silver, curved spoke you hold in your hands. You feel it tremble. You feel it reaching somewhere. And ahead you see a dim, distant glimmer of light, but you don't yet know what's there. You come closer, and you see that the light comes from a control panel. Green and red indicators glow, monitors, radar screens. It's the ship's control room, which you see through wide portholes. And just below them, on the side of the ship, you can read the golden inscription, Seeker. Mayhew began describing the ship in great detail, sometimes with humorous details, and Grimes realized that Mayhew was calmly extracting all the necessary information from the minds of the technical officers. He described the ship and the crew, emphasizing the contrast between the warmth and light on board and the black, cold void in which the dowser found himself. And as he described the crew, Grimes thought the characterizations he was giving weren't all that flattering. But this was their home. This small community on board was like a family. Grimes felt that much of what Mayhew said resonated deeply with him. This was home, Mayhew said, and Grimes felt what the sleeping dowser must feel. This was home, and it was close, almost there. One had only to reach out to feel the cold, hard surface of its metal shell, behind which lay comfort, warmth, and security. This was the house to which they all belonged, and Grimes suddenly thought with surprise that even this man in a glass box, shrouded in wires and tubes, who had appeared on their ship out of nowhere and no one knew how, also belonged to their house. He turned to Sonya and heard her words. So, once again, your premonitions have come true, John. And he remembered everything that had happened again. The failed hunt for the ghosts and their fall from time and space. And he realized that it had happened exactly as he had wanted. But now there was no longer any need for a political alliance between the leaders of potentially hostile tribes. How could such a thing have even occurred to her? Well, he said with difficulty, it was very nice meeting you, and now, she echoed. I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen, Mayhew began, but I must leave you. Now that we are back in our own universe, I will strictly adhere to the rules of our center and have no intention of eavesdropping on your thoughts. But I will tell you this, sir. I will tell you that the political alliance was just talk, a pretext, if you will. And I will tell you that the young lady has found what she was looking for, or who she was looking for. She has found him, and his name is not Derek Calver or Bill Maudsley. The patrol service would have put him on trial for such words, Sonya noted. And also in the Frontier Planet's naval space fleet, Grimes added. But I won't proceed with this matter. You're absolutely right. He said exactly what I was going to tell you, John. Let's just say he saved us some time. They didn't kiss, but merely held hands. They knew they were very close to each other. Together, they left the cabin and headed to the control room. There was no longer any need to continue the frantic ghost hunt. A long life lay before them, filled with more exciting things than searching for alien universes. For Grimes and for Sonya Verrill, this expedition was over.